Theodore Shaunessy was born on February 7, 1963, in Los Angeles, California. He was one of 3 children born to Teresa and David Shaunessy, with his brothers Thomas and Timothy completing the family. Although not much is known about Theodore's early years, it's widely recognized that even as a teenager, he was known for being kind, caring, and easy to talk to on almost any topic. He had a deep concern for the well-being of his loved ones. After finishing high school, Theodore became interested in the booming gem and jewelry business in California. He enrolled in specialized training programs offered by the American Gem Society, eventually earning his certification as a jeweler. In the mid-1980s, during a trip to Phoenix, Theodore met a young woman named Corey in a game arcade. Corey, born in 1966 in the small town of Wickenburg, Arizona, had a passion for painting, which led her to pursue a degree in fine arts. She dedicated herself almost exclusively to painting the desert landscapes that surrounded and inspired her. After their initial conversation, Theodore and Corey discovered a shared interest in jewelry design and creation. Their romance quickly blossomed, and Theodore soon moved to Arizona to be closer to her. Under Theodore's influence, Corey began studying gem classification, and together they dreamed of opening their own business. While waiting for their dream to become a reality, Theodore worked at local pawn shops, and once Corey completed her degree, she joined him. In 1988, the couple married, and a few years later, having honed their skills and gained valuable experience, they moved to Austin, Texas, to make their dream a reality. In 1995, the couple finally opened their own jewelry store. Theodore's dedication and passion were evident in every aspect of his work, whether he was on the hunt for precious stones or helping customers find the perfect piece. His patience and care in dealing with customers quickly made the shop a well-known and beloved establishment in the area, earning Theodore a reputation as a generous and kind-hearted individual. Thanks to their financial success, the couple accumulated a net worth of around $6 million, allowing them to build an impressive home on the outskirts of the city. Despite their success, one thing was missing: a family. For reasons not publicly known, the couple chose to adopt rather than have biological children. After completing the necessary paperwork, they received the joyful news in early 2000 that a child was waiting for them in Ukraine. The trip to meet the child was filled with nervous anticipation, but as soon as they saw the little boy, Theodore and Corey felt a sense of peace. His name was Nicholas, and he was 16 months old. Nearly 2 years later, the family of 3 returned to Austin, Texas, having fulfilled their dream of becoming parents. Nicholas quickly proved to be intelligent and curious, always eager to learn about the world around him. Like his parents, he developed a love for animals, leading the family to adopt 2 dogs. Theodore, who had taken up racing cars for fun, soon brought Nicholas along to the tracks, and the boy quickly shared his father's enthusiasm. As time passed, Nicholas learned to drive with Theodore's guidance, spending countless hours practicing on a go-kart track. His interests also extended to martial arts, where he eventually earned a black belt in karate. As Nicholas entered high school, he developed a fascination with finance and luxury goods, an unusual interest for someone his age. By then, he had achieved his black belt in karate and frequently discussed financial matters with his 2 closest friends, Spencer and Tyler. However, Nicholas's constant need to show off his wealth and possessions made others uncomfortable, including his friends. Despite this, he won the heart of a young girl named Jacqueline, who had moved to Austin from New Jersey after her parents' divorce. Jacqueline and Nicholas started dating, and in 2016, Nicholas introduced her to his family. Although the evening began somewhat awkwardly, by the end of dinner, Theodore and Corey were charmed by Jacqueline. Due to the physical abuse Jacqueline suffered at the hands of her father, she found refuge in the home of her boyfriend and his parents. Once Corey learned the reasons for Jacqueline's extended stays, she allowed her to move in with them, and the young couple took up residence in a room on the ground floor of the house. Corey, always nurturing, did her best to care for Jacqueline and even gifted her a beautiful diamond pendant for her 19th birthday, in keeping with the family's love for gemstones. As Nicholas neared the end of high school, his obsession with making money only grew stronger. He even wrote a detailed article for the school newspaper outlining a plan to get rich by working from home in the stock market. In July 2017, after graduating from high school, his mother agreed to loan him $30,000 to start his own business. A month later, Nicholas and Jacqueline moved into an apartment complex in College Station, about 2 hours east of Austin. Shortly afterward, with the help of Spencer, who had become an ordained minister, the young couple secretly married. Jacqueline focused on her university studies while Nicholas worked from home as a stockbroker. As their social circle expanded, Nicholas never missed an opportunity to brag about his supposedly successful business ventures. In reality, however, things were not going well and he was actually losing money. He borrowed $2,600 from a neighbor, promising to repay her with the profits from his investments. At the same time, Nicholas had to take out other loans that quickly came due, pushing his financial situation to a critical point by early 2018. When Jacqueline learned of their financial troubles, the couple argued and began discussing options to turn things around. What started as a joke about inheriting Theodore and Corey's fortune soon turned into a serious plan. After all, if they were no longer around, Nicholas would be the sole heir to a $2 million life insurance policy, plus an additional $6 million from the business and property. A few days later, the idea morphed into a real project, and the couple even agreed to hire someone to eliminate Theodore and Corey. The first person Nicholas approached for the job was his friend Spencer, but despite offering him $50,000, Spencer refused outright. The couple's initial failures did not deter their determination. On the contrary, by mid-February 2018, Nicholas turned to social media to continue his search for someone willing to carry out their dark plan. He contacted a woman who worked at the complex where he lived, offering her extra money. When she inquired about the nature of the work, he proposed that she kill 2 people in exchange for $20,000 per victim. The woman never responded again, and like the neighbor who had loaned him money, her identity has remained undisclosed for safety reasons. Nicholas faced similar rejection from a third individual he approached with the offer. Unwilling to give up, on Friday, February 23, 2018, he visited a local bar and struck up a conversation with Johnny Leon, a 21-year-old with a criminal record for drug offenses. After introducing himself and explaining the job, Nicholas offered Johnny $100,000, with payment to be made in installments. As they discussed the details, Nicholas texted Jacqueline to share the good news. When she asked about the cost, he brushed off her concerns. That night, Johnny and Nicholas agreed to meet later at Nicholas's house to finalize the plan. On Monday, February 26, 2018, Corey called her son to ask why he had not yet repaid the loan she had given him. The uncomfortable conversation quickly escalated into an argument, leaving Nicholas feeling even more pressured to achieve his goal. On the morning of Wednesday, February 28, 2018, before meeting with Nicholas, Johnny invited his friend Cameron Bosmek, who worked at a local company, to help with what he described as a moving job. Cameron, unsuspecting of anything nefarious, agreed. When Cameron and Johnny arrived at Nicholas's home, they were caught on the security cameras. Once inside, Nicholas revealed the true nature of the plan. He explained that he would deactivate the security alarm remotely from his phone to allow them access to his parents' home. They were to enter through a window in one of the rooms, where they would find a gun in a drawer. Nicholas offered Cameron $10,000 payable in 3 installments, but as soon as the words were out of his mouth, Cameron walked out, refusing to be part of the plan. Later that day, back home with his family, Cameron confided in his wife about the unsettling incident. Meanwhile, left alone with Johnny, Nicholas offered to accompany him on the mission. That night, they drove to Austin, but after several hours, Nicholas realized he couldn't go through with it, and they returned to College Station. The following day, Johnny introduced Nicholas to Maryanne Smith, a 23-year-old who had recently been released from prison after serving time for drug-related offenses. Despite his criminal past, Maryanne was willing to join the plan. Nicholas laid out the details again, and they agreed to carry out the attack on March 2, 2018. On Thursday, March 1, 2018, Theodore and Corey finished their usual workday at the jewelry store. After dinner, they went to bed as usual. Meanwhile, Johnny and Maryanne exchanged numerous messages, preparing for the task ahead. They met up and drove to Austin, arriving at around 4:30 a.m. Once Nicholas remotely deactivated the alarms, the 2 intruders entered the house. Following Nicholas's instructions, Maryanne retrieved the gun from the designated drawer. However, the family dogs, alerted by the intruders' movements, began barking, waking Theodore and Corey. Still groggy from sleep, Theodore grabbed a gun and headed to the kitchen. Maryanne, reacting quickly, fired several shots, hitting Theodore and causing him to collapse. In the chaos, one of the intruders also shot one of the family dogs. The noise from the gunfire prompted Corey to grab her gun. She positioned herself in the doorway of the bedroom and fired down the hallway, determined to defend her home, even though she couldn't see the intruders. Her actions, though they didn't injure the attackers, were enough to scare them off. They fled the scene, leaving Corey to take refuge in a closet where she called emergency services. It was nearly 5 a.m. when the police arrived, delayed because they initially went to the wrong address. During those agonizing minutes, Corey remained on the line with the 911 operator. When the operator finally instructed her to leave the closet and open the door for the officers, both Corey and the police were confronted with the horrific aftermath of the attack on Theodore. He was pronounced dead at 5:14 a.m., and through tears, Corey called her son to inform him of what had happened. As Nicholas and Jacqueline began their drive to Austin, the medical examiner determined that Theodore had died from multiple gunshot wounds. Meanwhile, the detectives initiated the investigation. What struck the detectives the most was the sheer number of bullet holes, both in the walls and scattered across the floor. They were able to reconstruct the attack with precision. Additionally, since only a side window was slightly ajar, they concluded that the intruders had likely used that window as their point of entry. Corey informed them that the window led to her son's former bedroom, prompting the detectives to search the room. In a dresser, they found an empty gun case. Immediately, they wondered if the missing gun had been used in the attack. Corey reported that nothing else was missing from the house and that she hadn't seen the intruders' faces. However, she suspected they knew about her and her husband's line of work. When Nicholas and Jacqueline arrived in Austin around 8 a.m., the detectives noticed Nicholas's unusual lack of concern. Their suspicions grew when, despite not knowing the full details of what had happened, Nicholas went straight to check the window in his old bedroom. A few minutes later, Nicholas, his mother, and his wife went to the police station to answer the detectives' questions. It was then that Nicholas recounted how he had learned about the incident. After Nicholas informed investigators that he had not been in the city for about a month, he handed over his cell phone. During their examination of the device, the officers discovered an app that allowed remote access to the family home's alarm system. When questioned about this, Corey explained that the alarm access was shared among all family members, but noted that it hadn't been activated that night. However, a review of the system's history revealed that the alarm had been deactivated at the exact time the intruders broke in, raising suspicions. Jacqueline corroborated her husband's story, stating that they had stayed home that night. Following these initial statements, all three were informed that they would undergo gunshot residue tests. Jacqueline's sudden nervousness caught the attention of the investigators, sparking further doubts. Meanwhile, at the crime scene, evidence collection continued, and due to the case's complexity, the district attorney was brought in to assist. She quickly began to suspect that Theodore might have known his attacker. As no fingerprints belonging to the family members were found, suspicions began to shift toward Corey. To make matters worse, Corey's decision to forego a funeral and her request to clean the house as soon as possible only fueled the investigators' doubts. While waiting for the case to be resolved, she closed the jewelry store and had her husband's remains cremated. On the same day, as his mother struggled to cope with her grief, Nicholas exchanged text messages with Spencer. He asked if Spencer wanted to see photos of the crime scene, boasting that the investigators had returned his phone, a clear sign, in his view, that he was no longer a suspect. When Corey was called in for another interview, the questioning was so intense that she began to feel as though she was no longer being treated as a victim. By then, however, she wasn't the only one under scrutiny. Her son had not been entirely ruled out as a suspect. On March 5, 2018, police officers began interviewing neighbors at Nicholas's apartment complex. This led them to the employee Nicholas had contacted via social media, who then revealed the details of his disturbing proposal. A few days later, armed with a search warrant, officers searched Nicholas and Jacqueline's apartment. They found ammunition matching the bullets recovered from the victim's body, as well as a marriage certificate exposing the secret wedding. They also seized a computer. When Corey learned of her son's secret marriage, she was at a loss for words. She reproached Nicholas for not doing things the right way, assuring him that there was no need to hide the marriage and that, had she known, she would have organized a proper wedding. As a result, Nicholas and Jacqueline moved back into the family home. Despite the mounting suspicions against him, Corey remained convinced of her son's innocence. Determined to support him, on March 10, 2018, Corey hired a group of attorneys and even handed over control of the jewelry store to Nicholas. Over the next month and into the following, the evidence against Nicholas began to pile up at an alarming rate. First, phone records revealed that, contrary to his initial statement, Nicholas had been in the city 2 days before the incident that claimed his father's life. Then, more incriminating text messages exchanged between him and Jacqueline surfaced. In May 2018, after locating Spencer, the detectives interviewed him at the station. Without much pressure, Spencer disclosed the amount Nicholas expected to inherit by eliminating his parents. He also provided text messages to support his claims, which cleared him of any suspicion. By the end of that month, Nicholas and Jacqueline were arrested. Both were charged with criminal solicitation to commit capital murder. Nicholas's bail was set at $3 million and Jacqueline's at $1 million. Faced with sworn statements and overwhelming evidence, Corey finally grasped the full extent of the nightmare she was living. Meanwhile, authorities hoped that time behind bars would lead the suspects to reveal the name of the actual killer. However, as neither showed any signs of cooperation, the officers prepared to take further action. During the first week of July 2018, one of the detectives meticulously reviewed the security camera footage from Nicholas and Jacqueline's home, focusing specifically on the days leading up to the crime. To his surprise, he discovered an image of Nicholas greeting two men at the front door. One of the men was wearing a shirt with the logo of a local company. Following this lead, the detective visited the company and learned that the man was Cameron, whose address he quickly obtained. A couple of hours later, when the detective arrived at Cameron's residence, his wife immediately knew the reason for the visit. Although Cameron wasn't home at the time, she shared what she knew and provided Johnny's name to the detective. On Wednesday, July 11, 2018, when Johnny was brought in for questioning at the station, he offered little resistance. It quickly became apparent to the detectives that they had found the accomplice they were looking for. Johnny was arrested and charged with capital murder. Further investigation revealed incriminating text messages exchanged between Johnny and Maryanne just hours before the crime, indicating that Johnny had not acted alone. Finding Maryanne, however, proved challenging, but he was finally apprehended on December 10, 2018. During his interrogation, Maryanne detailed the events of that night, breaking down as the questions continued. He expressed remorse for the tragedy his actions had caused and eventually admitted to being the one who fired the shot that killed Theodore. He also directed the detectives to where they could find the missing weapon, which turned out to be one of Nicholas's guns. Jacqueline, meanwhile, admitted that she had been aware of her husband's intentions from the start. Her cooperation earned her a reduced bail. With all the pieces in place for a trial, the district attorney initially planned to seek the death penalty for Nicholas. However, in the spring of 2021, the district attorney left her position, and her successor quickly offered plea deals to the three defendants. The deal allowed them to plead guilty to a reduced charge of murder in exchange for a 35-year sentence with the possibility of parole. In the end, all three accepted the offer. Jacqueline, who by that time was divorced, also agreed to plead guilty to attempted solicitation of capital murder, hoping for a more lenient sentence. In a virtual hearing held on April 7, 2021, the judge sentenced Nicholas and Maryanne to 35 years in prison. A week later, Johnny Leon received an identical sentence for the same crime. On June 20, 2023, Jacqueline was sentenced to 4 months in jail, 10 years of probation, and 300 hours of community service. Additionally, her passport was revoked, and she was prohibited from leaving the state of Texas without first informing her probation officers. As part of her sentence, the court ordered that Jacqueline serve 2 days in jail every year on the anniversary of Theodore's death. Corey, unable to attend the hearing, recorded a message that was played in court at the end of the session as her victim impact statement. In later interviews, Corey reflected on how Nicholas and Jacqueline had shattered a part of her world, taking away what she loved most. With remarkable strength, she set out to overcome the cruel loss of her husband and the devastating betrayal by her son, with whom she never spoke again. Morgan Chantel Mick was born to Morris and Colleen Nick in Ozark, Arkansas, on September 12, 1988. She was the couple's first child, and later, the family expanded with the birth of 2 more children. Morris was known to be a loving and kind father. Those who knew the couple said they embraced their parental responsibilities, doing everything in their power to make life easier for their children. Though Morris and Colleen initially seemed happy, challenges soon surfaced in their relationship. When Morgan was 6, they decided to separate, which ultimately led to a divorce. The process, however, was amicable, and they never fought over the custody of their children. The children primarily lived with Colleen, a devoted mother who always put her children first. Morgan and Colleen shared a close bond, spending most of their time together. Morgan excelled academically, despite her young age. Having just completed kindergarten, her family could already envision her thriving in elementary school. Personality-wise, Morgan was a shy child with a big heart. She loved apples and was fond of cats, leading her mother to allow her to have one as a pet. Despite her shyness, Morgan was actively involved as a Girl Scout and enjoyed playing with other kids. She dreamt of becoming a circus artist or a doctor when she grew up. On June 9, 1995, Colleen received an invitation from a friend to watch a minor league baseball game in Alma, Arkansas. Thinking Morgan might enjoy watching other kids play, she asked her to accompany her to the game, about 30 minutes away from their home. It was a night game, starting at 9 p.m. Upon arriving, the stands were already packed, but Colleen managed to find a spot for herself and Morgan. However, 6-year-old Morgan soon grew bored and began fidgeting with her shoelaces. Despite being a calm child, usually hesitant to engage with strangers, 2 older kids approached her. They introduced themselves as Jessica and Ty, aged 8 and 10 respectively. There are different accounts of what happened next. In one version, Morgan asked her mother if she could play with Jessica and Ty, but Colleen initially declined. Concerned about the unfamiliar surroundings and the packed venue of almost 300 people, Colleen was hesitant to let Morgan wander off. However, Colleen's friends urged her to let Morgan play, assuring her she was being overprotective and that Morgan would be fine. Eventually, Colleen relented. The kids mentioned wanting to run up a nearby hill to catch fireflies. With the game nearing its end around 10:30 p.m., Colleen allowed Morgan to go, but only for a short while. In another version, when Jessica and Ty invited Morgan to catch fireflies, Morgan's innate shyness made her decline. Yet Colleen's friends thought it would be good for Morgan to interact with other kids. Colleen then persuaded a reluctant Morgan to go with them, even if it meant leaving her mother's side. What's certain is Morgan left the stands with the 2 children. While Colleen tried to keep an eye on them, she got distracted when the baseball game ended and teams came into the stands to greet their families. The next time Colleen looked for the children, she saw Jessica and Ty returning without Morgan. Concerned, she immediately asked them about her daughter's whereabouts. They replied that the girl had disappeared while everyone was emptying sand from their shoes, leaning against Colleen's car. Subsequent investigations revealed that while Jessica and Ty sat at the front of the vehicle shaking out their shoes, Morgan was alone at the back emptying hers. Another significant and worrying detail was that the children insisted they saw a creepy man talking to Morgan before she vanished. Confused and anxious, Colleen immediately raised the alarm, and the adults present at the baseball field helped her search the nearby areas for her missing daughter. However, hours passed in the search without results, and Colleen decided to report the incident to the local police. Those who knew Colleen highlighted her kind nature and how she was always willing to help those in need. Therefore, when she needed support in searching for her child, many showed their solidarity. Additionally, being the devoted mother who always looked out for her children made the community even more outraged at the kidnapper or kidnappers who took Morgan away from her family. On the day she disappeared, Morgan was a beautiful girl with blonde hair and blue eyes. Before going to the baseball game with her mother, she had attended her Girl Scouts activities and was wearing the organization's green shirt, blue denim shorts, and white tennis shoes. Another distinguishing feature of the young girl was that she had 5 silver crowns on her molars, a type of cap used to cover and protect a damaged tooth, which were easily visible. When the police were informed of the disappearance, they immediately began their investigation. Officers and local volunteers organized numerous search mobilizations, while detectives went door to door seeking evidence and witnesses. Since Jessica and Ty claimed to have seen a man speaking with Morgan before her disappearance, the police compiled a detailed description of the suspect, who was said to be between 23 and 38 years old with black hair sprinkled with gray, and he had a mustache and beard. Witnesses also reported seeing a faded red pickup truck nearby with a mismatched white camper shell that seemed too small by a couple of inches. They noticed possible damage to the back right corner of the vehicle. Some claimed the truck had Arkansas license plates, but the plate number wasn't recorded. Additionally, upon reviewing home videos recorded at the baseball field, investigators confirmed the existence of the suspect and the aforementioned red truck. However, unfortunately, the recordings were too grainy to provide a clear image of his face. Once Colleen reported Morgan's disappearance, she called her ex-husband and informed him of the situation. Morris seemed devastated by his daughter's disappearance and expressed willingness to cooperate with law enforcement. Surprisingly, during the initial investigation, the girl's father became a potential suspect as some evidence suggested he acted as a low-level drug dealer. He also reportedly had a criminal history, including assault and property damage charges. From the beginning of the investigation, Colleen was willing to cooperate with law enforcement in every way because her only wish was for her daughter to return safely. However, when investigators initially suspected Morris, her ex-husband, of being involved in Morgan's disappearance, she felt the police were making a grave mistake. She defended him, claiming he would never harm their children. Fortunately, the police soon ruled out Morris as a person of interest and focused their attention on Clifford Joe Pullen, rumored to be his drug supplier. This individual had a criminal record, and in addition to being arrested for marijuana possession, he had also been charged with first-degree rape of a minor in 1995, suggesting he might be capable of kidnapping. Nevertheless, authorities quickly cleared Clifford of any suspicion and stated he was not involved in Morgan's disappearance. Although the police received numerous leads at the time, none led to Morgan, and months, and then years went by. During this period, information from Albert Harvey, a resident of Stuttgart, Arkansas, seemed promising. He claimed he had seen a man fitting the suspect's description with a blonde child trying to enter his truck. Interestingly, Albert was able to identify the suspect from the sketch, and the police used all their resources to scour the area. However, as hours went by without any leads, law enforcement began to doubt his claims. They subjected Albert to 2 polygraph tests, which he failed, and he eventually admitted to lying. The case went cold, and as time passed, the search was no longer for his 6-year-old girl, so the existing photos of Morgan seemed insufficient. To provide a solution, in February 2001, the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children released an age-progressed photo showing what Morgan might look like at 12 years old. The intention behind such photographs was to widely disseminate an updated image of Morgan. This way, if someone spotted a teenager resembling the image, they could alert authorities to verify it if she was the girl abducted in 1995. Leads in the case were dwindling. Although police vowed that they wouldn't stop working the case until they found Morgan, the trail was growing cold. Searches would continue to be held sporadically, and detectives still followed up on every tip they received, but nothing brought them any closer to finding Morgan. The next lead came in January 2002, when a tip led investigators to search a property in Logan County, Arkansas. A witness claimed that Morgan was buried there. This testimony was so detailed and specific that the police acted on it. However, despite using search dogs and scouring the area thoroughly, nothing was found. On August 14, 2005, ABC's Extreme Makeover, Home Edition, and John Walsh, co-founder of the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, addressed the topic of missing children, highlighting Morgan's abduction. Colin and Morgan's siblings received a new home after their family home was damaged by a water heater explosion. In November 2010, federal investigators searched a vacant house in Sparrow, Oklahoma, after receiving a tip from a confidential informant. Sparrow was about 25 miles from Alma, and the property they searched had once belonged to a convicted child molester who was currently in jail. Although investigators had nothing linking the man to Morgan's disappearance, they searched through the home looking for possible DNA evidence that might indicate Morgan had been there. Unfortunately, they didn't uncover anything related to the case. In August 2012, two convicts, identified as Tonya Smith and James Monhart, were accused of trying to buy some of Morgan's personal documents, including her social security number and birth certificate. While they were found guilty of document forgery, investigations determined they weren't involved in Morgan's disappearance. On December 18, 2017, police conducted another search on a property in Spiro. Some reports said it was for an unrelated investigation, while others believed it was connected to Morgan's case. Notably, the search dogs signaled to a well on the property, which then became the focus of the search. After an intense 24-hour search, investigators left the property without finding any evidence. In November 2021, detectives identified Billy Jacklinks as a potential suspect in Morgan Mick's abduction. An Arkansas resident, Billy was a registered sex offender who had been in and out of prison since 1992. Reports suggest he had a typical upbringing, with no apparent signs of deviance. He served in the U.S. Army during World War and later worked for an airline in Dallas before returning to Arkansas. Despite seemingly staying out of trouble, he was arrested and charged with sexual offenses in 1992. 2 months after Morgan's 1995 disappearance, Billy attempted to kidnap an 11-year-old girl only 8 miles from where Morgan vanished. Witnesses reported he drove a red pickup truck, aligning with descriptions from Morgan's case. A week after Billy's arrest, investigators searched his truck, finding hair, fibers, a mash sheet, rope, a tarp, insulation tape, and blood on one of the seats. The samples were stored for future analysis, but it's unclear if they were tested then. Shortly after his arrest, Arkansas State Police and the FBI tried to question him about Morgan's case, but he invoked his right to an attorney and refused to talk. Regarding the 11-year-old he tried to kidnap, Billy proclaimed his innocence, but he was convicted of sexual solicitation and sentenced to 6 years in prison in 1995. Billy remained behind bars until his sudden illness and death on August 5, 2000. In 2021, a news channel aired a documentary titled Still Missing Morgan. Arkansas police mentioned they were still seeking information about the red truck with an attached white cabin. The documentary led to over 200 new tips, but none have resolved the case. The revelation about Billy Jacklinks was the last major update, but Morgan's disappearance remains an active investigation, with the police continuously receiving tips. Meanwhile, Colleen pleads with law enforcement to follow every lead, refusing to rest until his daughter is found, hoping for her safe return. This case has profoundly impacted Arkansas and even influenced the naming of the Amber Alert. The Amber Alert system began in 1996 after the disappearance of Amber Haterman in Arlington, Texas. Amber is an acronym for America's Missing Broadcast Emergency Response, managed under the Department of Justice. The Morgan Mick Amber Alert is Arkansas's name for the program designed to alert the public when a child goes missing. This program is a joint effort between local law enforcement, media outlets, and civic groups to raise awareness about potential abductions, thereby increasing the chances of locating the missing child. Activating the Morgan Mick Alert involves the participation of all Arkansas law enforcement agencies, along with more than 250 local radio stations, TV networks, and other media outlets. This information is quickly disseminated to all parties, enabling them to broadcast details about a possible abduction widely. As of 2023, the case remains unsolved. Since Morgan's disappearance in 1995, her father, Morris, has opted for privacy, preferring not to discuss his daughter's case publicly. In contrast, Morgan's mother, Colleen, is vocal about her ongoing efforts to bring Morgan home. Colleen lives in Alma, Arkansas, where she runs the Morgan Mick Foundation, assisting families dealing with abductions or missing persons. Beyond advocating for these families, Colleen spreads awareness about daily dangers faced by children and offers detailed resources to help parents and teachers understand online safety basics and parental control apps. Despite extensive investigations that have yielded thousands of leads, there is still no concrete information on Morgan's whereabouts. The FBI and local communities have offered a reward of $60,000 for information leading to the recovery of Morgan Nick and the identification, arrest, and conviction of those responsible for her kidnapping. Stephanie Bennett was born on August 30, 1979, in the small American town of Rocky Mount, Virginia. After her parents divorced during her childhood, Stephanie lived with her mother. Despite the divorce, her father lived nearby, and Stephanie would see him nearly every day. Later on, her father remarried, giving Stephanie a stepsister named Diana. Upon finishing high school, Stephanie attended Roanoke College, which was 350 kilometers from her home. In her senior year, she met a young man named Walter, and they started dating. After college, the couple split but continued their relationship even as they moved to different cities. Stephanie moved to Raleigh, North Carolina, alongside her stepsister Diana and a mutual friend named Emily. The three shared an apartment in the Bridgeport residential complex located in a quiet, peaceful area on the outskirts of the city. Stephanie secured a job at IBM, while her boyfriend moved to Greenville, South Carolina, to pursue an engineering degree. After living in Raleigh for about a year, and with Stephanie recently having turned 23, she, her stepsister, and her friend were planning to relocate to different cities. Stephanie intended to move to Greenville to be with Walter, and the couple had already begun looking for a place to live together. In May, Stephanie visited Greenville, where she and Walter viewed several apartments and chose one suitable for them. Upon her return to Raleigh, she found that Emily had moved to another city, and Diana had left for a few days to attend a funeral. On the night of May 20, Stephanie came home from work and spoke on the phone with Walter, who was to fax her the lease agreement for the new apartment for her signature. They agreed that Walter would send it the following day when Stephanie could use the fax machine at her workplace. The next day, Walter was unable to reach Stephanie by phone, either at work or at home. After several unsuccessful attempts and Stephanie failing to show up for work, her friends and family became concerned and contacted the police. When the police arrived at her apartment, they found Stephanie deceased on the floor of her bedroom. Upon finding identification documents and confirming through a photograph, they identified Stephanie as the victim. Investigators noted a dirty clothes hamper under the window of Emily's bedroom, which had been moved. They surmised that the killer could have entered the apartment through the window. Additionally, they found the home phone in Emily's bedroom closet with its cord cut, suggesting the perpetrator had hidden there and disabled the phone to prevent the victim from using it. After speaking with Diana, the police learned that several items were missing from the apartment. The perpetrator had taken $8 from Stephanie's wallet, 2 recorders, and the clothes hamper from Stephanie's room, presumably to carry the stolen items. Forensic experts found DNA evidence on the victim and took a sample, but it did not match any records in the FBI database. The cause of death was determined to be asphyxiation. Notably, the murder weapon was not found at the scene, leading to the belief that the killer had taken it. Investigators interviewed other residents of the apartment complex, hoping someone might have seen the killer. During these interviews, it came to light that for several months, residents have reported someone lurking around and peeping through windows of the complex. The manager was questioned, but the complex administration could not locate the suspect. Notably, at least once, this individual was seen at Stephanie's window. Moreover, a few months before, an unknown man attacked a woman jogging near the lake by the complex. After this incident, Stephanie was scared to stay alone in her apartment and wished to move to Greenville as soon as possible. Investigators examined the complex's surroundings and found something peculiar. In the bushes, they discovered several dozen women's underwear, later identified as belonging to Stephanie. The police theorized that the murderer might have taken these from the apartment, but then discarded them in the bushes for some reason. However, this theory was soon disproved. It turned out that a teenager living in the adjacent apartment regularly entered Stephanie's room and stole her underwear, then discarded them in the bushes. The young man admitted this when questioned by investigators, but denied any involvement in the murder. His DNA did not match the sample from the crime scene, so he was no longer considered a suspect. The police thought that the man who had been spying on women through the apartment windows was the most obvious candidate for the murder. After speaking with everyone who had seen this mare, the detectives created a composite sketch and published it in the newspapers, but without success. As standard procedure, investigators checked Stephanie's boyfriend, who voluntarily provided a DNA sample that did not match the murderer's. Additionally, at the time of the murder, Walter was several hundred kilometers away and could not physically have been at the scene. Subsequently, the police asked all the men in the complex to voluntarily provide a DNA sample. This also yielded no results. No match was found among the 283 DNA profiles received, and at this point, there were no significant leads. Detectives organized surveillance of the apartment complex in hopes of catching the man who had been spying on residents. To their surprise, they soon succeeded. On June 3, police observed a man approaching several ground floor windows and looking inside the homes. While at one of the windows, this man began to masturbate, and the police immediately arrested him. This individual turned out to be Christopher Lee, who had been convicted multiple times for peeping and stalking women, including a 3-year prison sentence for harassment in 2000. The detectives thought they had finally caught the killer, but were disappointed. Christopher's DNA did not match the sample found on Stephanie's body. He was charged with peeping but was no longer considered a suspect in the murder. The police continued working on the case without any significant leads. A year later, the lead detective heard about a lab in Florida that could determine a person's ethnic ancestry based on their DNA. Despite doubts about this technology, he did not want to miss an opportunity, so he sent the DNA of 4 of his colleagues of different ethnic backgrounds as a test. The experts completed the task with 100% accuracy, and the detective then submitted the killer's DNA from Stephanie's case. At the lab, they determined that the DNA owner was Caucasian, but this information did not significantly aid the police. In August 2003, the victim's father offered a $100,000 reward for any information leading to the capture of the killer. Stephanie's mother wrote a letter published in local newspapers, imploring people to share any information with the police that could help identify the suspect. This generated some new leads, but they led nowhere. In April 2004, based on numerous witness accounts, the detectives decided to re-interview all residents of the complex. They learned that the man arrested for peeping might not be the only one lurking around the complex buildings and looking through others' windows. Having identified the first man and possessing his photos, the investigators wanted to speak again with residents who had seen a man spying around. Unfortunately, none had seen his face. He often appeared during the dark hours, wearing a hood over his head. Some witnesses mentioned they had seen him without a hood, but could only make out his long hair. Detectives interviewed dozens of individuals until they finally found someone who had seen this person near Stephanie Bennett's window before her murder. This witness already had given a statement to the police, but now remembered something else. He saw the man a few days after the incident. The man was walking his dog near a wooded area behind the residential complex, recognizable by his hoodie. The witness watched the man until he disappeared among the trees with his Labrador. It seemed the witness had either forgotten this detail or hadn't thought it related to the murder, so the police didn't have this information during the initial interrogations. 2 years after Stephanie's death, detectives learned they should be looking for a man with a Labrador who, since he walked the dog in that area, likely lived nearby. Detectives found an interesting fact. There was another residential complex behind the wooded area where the man was spotted. Assuming the dog owner might live there, the police inquired with the complex staff if they knew of a man with a Labrador. They were immediately given the name Drew Planton, a 35-year-old regarded as somewhat odd by complex employees. He was described as reclusive, hardly speaking to anyone, never making eye contact, and always wearing loose-fitting clothing, presumably to avoid drawing attention to himself. Upon further investigation, they spoke with an elderly resident who kept an eye on the complex's goings-on. When told they were investigating Stephanie Bennett's murder, she expressed surprise that no one had been arrested, mentioning that boy with the big dog as a known figure. The residents had suspected this man, but had not reported their suspicions to the police. Drew had since moved elsewhere in the city. The detectives attempted to contact him at his new apartment, but received no response despite repeated visits at various times. While searching for Drew, the police interviewed his neighbors who shared alarming details. A woman living above him saw Drew with a young man shortly after Stephanie's murder, and Drew was reportedly telling the young man not to talk to the police. This led investigators to believe that the young man might have been involved in the theft of undergarments from the victim's apartment. Other women had felt menaced by Drew. They observed him while jogging or in secluded places, watching closely or even following them. Unable to contact Drew at home, detectives found his workplace and approached him there. Drew, a chemist in a fertilizer production lab, denied knowledge of Stephanie Bennett's murder, which was odd considering his close proximity to the crime scene. He was uncooperative, but agreed to answer questions at his home at a scheduled time. When detectives met with him at his apartment, he denied ever walking his dog near Stephanie's complex. Given the numerous witnesses who had seen him in the area, the detectives immediately suspected he was lying. He also claimed not to wear glasses, contrary to his driver's license information and witness descriptions of a man peering into apartment windows wearing glasses. Predictably, Drew refused to voluntarily provide a DNA sample. The detectives decided to surveil him in hopes of obtaining a DNA sample by other means, but this proved challenging as he left no items behind that could be analyzed in a lab. For example, during lunchtime, he would leave work, sit in his car, and simply stare at a fixed point. Didn't the man eat anything? As a result, detectives were unable to retrieve any object with his DNA. Detectives observed as Drew discarded an empty water bottle into a trash container. They retrieved it and took it to the laboratory. However, the experts were unable to obtain a DNA sample from it. According to one account, Drew deliberately took a clean bottle and threw it away on the street, knowing he was under surveillance. After that, the police decided to try and obtain his trash, but they also failed in this endeavor. For several days, they never saw him take out the trash. Notably, the man's neighbors also couldn't recall ever seeing him with a trash bag. Later, the investigators sought assistance from Drew's boss. She agreed to help them obtain an item from his workplace that might contain his DNA. She observed him for several days, but was never able to retrieve any object. Drew rarely ate at work, never discarded anything, and not a single hair could be found in his office. Given that the man had long hair, this seemed odd. The investigators were already convinced that Drew was meticulously eliminating any traces so they couldn't obtain his DNA. Once, the boss saw him pick up his hair and tie it with an elastic band. After that, he meticulously picked up any strands that had fallen to the floor. Then the woman decided to invite him to lunch at a cafe to supposedly discuss some work matters. But even there, the man was extremely cautious. Eating mostly with his hands, he stored all used napkins in his pocket and even took the straw and the glass with his drink. For dessert, he ordered banana pudding, and Drew finally used a fork. However, after using it, he cleaned the fork with a damp napkin for 15 minutes, eliminating any possibility of obtaining a DNA sample from the utensil. Despite this, the investigators took the fork and brought it to the laboratory. The experts were able to find small DNA samples that showed a partial match with the DNA at the crime scene of Stephanie Bennett. However, the result was too inconclusive as more biological material was needed for a complete comparison. In the end, the detectives obtained a search warrant for Drew's workplace, hoping to find an item containing his DNA. The investigators were also concerned that the man might flee once he realized they were executing the search warrant, so they decided to conduct it at night. Among the suspect's belongings, they found gloves he was supposed to use while working with chemicals. The detectives suspected that his DNA might be inside the gloves, so they took them and replaced them with another pair. They still feared that Drew might flee if he realized the police had his DNA. Experts found biological material inside the gloves, and the DNA analysis showed a complete match. Finally, the detectives were confident that Drew was responsible for the murder of Stephanie Bennett and had undeniable evidence in their hands. On October 18, 2005, the police quietly surrounded the laboratory where the man worked and waited for him to exit. The investigators feared that attempting to arrest him inside the building might lead to him taking a colleague as a hostage or attacking them. These fears were not unfounded, as when the man left the building, they immediately arrested him. They found a loaded firearm in his possession, indicating he was well aware that the police were close to capturing him and had no intention of surrendering easily. During the interrogation, which lasted more than 6 hours, Drew did not say a word, refused food and water, and barely moved. In the end, detectives had to place him in a wheelchair to move him around. With a search warrant for his apartment, the investigators found a stash of stolen clothing belonging to Stephanie. Additionally, they discovered 9 pistols, 2 rifles, 40 knives, a pair of handcuffs, and a machete. They also found lock-picking tools and handcuffs. The detectives came across a notebook with dozens of women's names, which they immediately started to trace to ensure their safety. It turned out that one of the women was the same resident of his apartment complex who had complained about Drew during the interrogation. She said that the man watched her on the street, and she felt consistently uncomfortable. Her fears were confirmed when the police found her underwear and tampons in Drew's house. Moreover, there was a copy of her high school graduation videotape. It turned out that Drew had entered her apartment, taken the tape, made a copy, and returned it. All this time, he had kept these items even after moving. In his apartment, they also found a check made out to the woman who was murdered in 1999. The investigators discovered that at that time, Drew lived in the same city. Additionally, the woman had been killed with a firearm of a quite rare caliber. But it was precisely that weapon, found in the man's collection during the search, that made Drew a suspect in this case. However, he first had to stand trial for the murder of Stephanie Bennett. A month after his arrest, the prosecution officially announced that they would seek the death penalty. The trial was set to begin the following year, and Drew spent that time in solitary confinement, but the trial never took place. On January 1, 2006, Drew was found dead in his cell, despite all the precautions that were in place. The investigators had no doubt that Drew had killed Stephanie Bennett, but after searching his house, the inevitable question arose: how many other victims might this person have had? At the very least, it was probable that he had been behind the murder of a woman in 1999. The detectives were almost certain that Drew might have been involved in other crimes as well. After carefully studying his background, the police uncovered several interesting details. Drew was raised in a complete family with 3 siblings. His father constantly humiliated and beat the children until their mother fled with them to another state. As a result, Drew became a very introverted teenager, a trait that intensified over time. Despite this, he received a good education and found a decent job as a chemist. His colleagues said that he was very intelligent, but his social skills were practically non-existent. He had no friends, did not talk to anyone at work, and always tried to keep as far away from the group as possible. Interestingly, Drew's biological brother also had a criminal record. He spied on women with a hidden camera and received a suspended sentence. In 2008, Drew's mother sued the state government, accusing the authorities of allowing her son's death. However, the judge concluded that the prison guards had taken all necessary precautions and could not have stopped the man. Stephanie Bennett's father tried to sue the management of the apartment complex for ignoring residents' reports of a man who was spying, as well as for not paying enough attention to the safety of residents on the premises. According to him, there was insufficient lighting around the buildings in the dark, and anyone could walk there unnoticed. He also found out that the window of his daughter's apartment was broken, but the complex's management did not rush to fix this problem, despite it being their direct duty. In the end, however, he withdrew these accusations without commenting on his decision. Thus, this complex and puzzling case was finally resolved. The police still wonder today how many other victims might Drew have had. The available information suggests that the man was prone to committing serial crimes, but after his death, it became practically impossible to know the truth. The story of Rachel Marie Runan began on June 23, 1979, when she was born in the serene landscapes of Weber County, Utah, United States. She was the only girl in the family of Jeff and Elaine Runan. The couple's firstborn was named Justin, and the youngest child was Nathan. The three siblings lived in harmony, promising laughter and shared memories. According to reviews of her life in 1981, Rachel, with her innate grace, the 2-year-old girl, ascended to the realm of childhood royalty by being crowned Little Miss Sunset. With her golden hair and radiant smile, she captivated attention at every local event. But little Rachel not only had physical beauty, her inner nobility was much greater according to her mother Elaine. She was a gentle and kind girl who was often seen on the periphery of playgrounds. She was extremely observant and analytical, and knew how to stay away from the rough games between Justin and the other boys. She had the habit of sucking her thumb while observing the mischief of others. That gave her an even sweeter and also funny appearance, which aroused much sympathy. Her mother occasionally teased her about her future, predicting that she would have rabbit or beaver teeth, to which Rachel responded with a naughty giggle. The Runan family chose to settle in Sunset, a community only about 6,000 inhabitants back then, which seemed a safe paradise to raise their children. Their modest home was located near the Doxey Elementary School playground. For the three little Runans, that park became their place of laughter and fun. Trusting that they were doing their best for their children, Jeff and Elaine decided to install a gate in the fence of their own yard, opening a direct passage to the favorite place site of the three children. Despite the apparent tranquility of Sunset, Jeff and Elaine were always vigilant, tirelessly warning their children about the risks of trusting strangers. They insisted on the importance of staying in safe places and, above all, taught them never to follow someone unknown, no matter what they offered. Their commitment to their children's safety was unquestionable. In the late morning of August 26, 1982, 3-year-old Rachel, her brother Nathan, and the eldest 5-year-old Justin asked their mother for a simple request. They wanted her permission to go to the playground of Doxey Elementary School, less than 5 meters from their home. Although Elaine had always been cautious about letting her children play without her supervision, the proximity of the playground and the need to finish preparing lunch led her to agree to the request. As no precautions seemed excessive to her, the mother watched them from the kitchen window while preparing food. However, when lunchtime came around at approximately 12:55 p.m., only Nathan and Justin returned home. The voice of little Justin trembled as he told his mother what had happened moments before. He described how a young man had forcibly taken Rachel from the park. The man first attempted to lure all three children, promising ice creams and chewing gums from a nearby store. While playing in the open air, the man approached them, trying to persuade them to get into his car, claiming to have the gum-flavored ice cream they longed for. In hell innocence, Rachel mentioned her favorite ice cream flavor, and Justin, acting as the protective older brother, warned his sister not to pay attention to the stranger's offer. Then Rachel started to walk away, but the man was quicker, roughly grabbing and carrying her over his shoulder, silencing her screams as he took her to his vehicle. Justin and Nathan, paralyzed by fear, hadn't fully recovered when their mother called them to eat. Instantly, Elaine found herself in the midst of her worst nightmare. With her heart racing, she hurried to the store the man mentioned, questioning employees and shoppers with heartbreaking urgency. However, her inquiries yielded no results. No one remembered seeing Rachel or the man. 20 minutes after Rachel's disappearance, Elaine was at the Sunset Police Department, sporting the kidnapping. With immense distress, Elaine barely managed to speak, and the search for answers became a painful and uncertain journey. The Sunset Police acted promptly, initiating a plan involving vehicle checks around the city. Despite their efforts, the suspect was not apprehended, nor was Rachel recovered. With time pressing, a special team of 10 investigators from various law enforcement agencies in Utah gathered under the direction of Sheriff Brant Johnston, intending to solve the child's mysterious abduction. Descriptions provided by Justin and another 10-year-old child at the park gave investigators critical details. They described a light-skinned African-American man, around 30 to 35 years old, with distinctive afro hair and a marked mustache. He drove an old dark blue 4-door vehicle, embellished with wooden strips on the sides. This man had been seen in the park, interacting with various children and having a cup of coffee for at least 15 minutes before taking Rachel against her will. His strategy was to avoid immediate alarm and prevent children from screaming in his presence by engaging them in playful activities. The children's sharp memories allowed the police to create a detailed composite sketch. However, the 3 children were the only direct witnesses, as no security camera have recorded the incident in the school playground. Despite persistent calls by police and the media, no one reported seeing a man with those characteristics. Subsequent efforts by the law enforcement agencies involved forensic analysis and rigorous door-to-door investigations supported by a committee of neighbors, many of whom offered monetary contributions for an improvised search. The Runan family embarked on a heartbreaking journey to find their beloved daughter. With limited resources but unwavering will, both the family and the community volunteers launched various methods to find Rachel. A national flyer campaign displaying the girl's image was meticulously orchestrated, and friends and neighbors joined in a race against time, calming local neighborhoods in a frantic search. The case of Rachel Runan saw thousands of missing person posters disseminated to raise public awareness regarding her disappearance. The public's response was overwhelming, providing investigators with myriad clues about Rachel's possible location and the potential identity of the abductor. Despite the determination in pursuing every lead, the outcomes were predominantly disheartening. A week after the harrowing disappearance, Rachel's parents, Jeff and Elaine, traveled to New York to attend a press conference with the intent to sustain media attention and emphasize the urgency of their daughter's return. Jeff, in a courageous plea, conveyed the profound damage the abductor had inflicted on their daughter and themselves, urging anyone with information to come forward. Elaine, with visible anguish, suggested the possibility of Rachel being sold after her abduction, and she appealed to potential adoptive parents to ensure they were not adopting her missing daughter. The family's relentless dedication was soon met with a harsh reality of mounting financial costs, reaching $10,000 in postage expenses alone within 3 weeks. The long-term sustainability of such immense physical, emotional, and financial exertion was seemingly impossible. On September 3rd, The distressed parents brought their appeals to the Today Show, offering a reward of $20,000, primarily sourced from community donations, aiming to gather more information on Rachel's whereabouts. The community of Sunset demonstrated immense solidarity, contributing an additional $20,000 to the reward, totaling $40,000, a substantial incentive for Rachel's safe return at that time. The unexpected discovery on September 19, 1982, obliterated the enduring hopes of those searching for Rachel and left her loved one's heart broken. A family traveling in Mountain Green, Utah, discovered the partially covered body of a small girl, later identified as Rachel, despite the advanced decomposition. The mystery surrounding her death persisted, as the exact cause remained undetermined, with asphyxiation not ruled out. Following the painful confirmation of Rachel's fate, Jeff and Elaine organized a proper farewell, attended by over 300 people. Rachel was finally laid to rest at the Washington Heights Memorial Park in Ogden, Utah. In the midst of devastation, Elaine transformed her pain into efficacy for child safety and legal improvements for child abduction cases, fostering awareness and change in a world that had brought her immeasurable sorrow. With her heart shattered but resolve unbroken, Elaine became a steadfast support, offering counsel, guidance, and solace to other parents, plunged into the turmoil of their children's disappearances. As accounts of this case highlight, Rachel's legacy surpassed her individual tragedy. Her kidnapping and the horrifying manner of her death echoed through the halls of power, serving as catalysts for substantial change. In October 1982, legislation was enacted at the federal level, granting parents of missing children access to an information exchange hub managed by the Federal Bureau of Investigation, FBI. This hub began accumulating and archiving fingerprint and blood-type records of over 300,000 children from Utah, aiming to forge an indispensable resource in combating child abductions. It may seem grim to assert that the agonizing loss of Rachel to an unapprehended abductor wasn't futile, but that is indeed the case. The state of Utah introduced the Rachel Alert System in April 2002. Intended to notify residents about active child abduction and missing children cases, this system emerged as a ray of hope. It was only initiated when rigorous criteria were fulfilled, such as the child being a minor or mentally disabled, immediate danger, and not running away voluntarily. Detailed physical descriptions of the child were also mandatory. The Rachel Alert was activated only twice, during the disappearance of Elizabeth Smart in June 2002 and the kidnapping of Nicholas Triplett, a 3-month-old, in January 2003. Both children were eventually recovered alive. After Elizabeth Smart's safe return, realizing the efficacy of such alert systems, 41 states adopted the Amber Alert System, named for another girl, Amber Haderman. In April 2003, Utah transitioned from the Rachel Alert to the Amber Alert System to comply with national standards. However, this didn't signify that the 3-year-old would be forgotten. To honor her memory, the Attorney General's office instituted the Rachel Runan Award for citizens who aid in recovering a child by contacting the law enforcement when an alert is issued. Elaine was also invited to participate in the award ceremonies. Currently, the Amber Alert System undergoes testing twice a year in Utah on January 13 and August 26, the dates marking the anniversary of Rachel's abduction. Although Rachel's murderer remains of large in the case unsolved, Lieutenant Phil instead's vow that it will not be forgotten persists. Phil, the first to respond to Elaine's urgent call following her daughter's abduction, has continually supported the Runan family. Over the years, he repeatedly reassured them of Sunset Police Department's unwavering commitment to find the individual responsible for Rachel's abduction and subsequent tragic death. In 2007, the case was officially reopened, and the police have been collaborating closely with the Utah Attorney General's office in their quest to apprehend and bring the perpetrator to justice. At the time, a $58,000 reward was offered to anyone delivering information, leading to the arrest and conviction of the perpetrator. With the reward seemingly not alluring enough to elicit crucial information, hopes of identifying the perpetrator are heavily dependent on substantial advancements in forensic technology since 1982. Strategies like the potential exhumation of Rachel's body to collect more evidence were also considered. In 2007, DNA testing on items found near the location of the remains provided initial results, but didn't significantly advance the investigation. Regardless of the hurdles and uncertainties, the Runan family maintains hope that justice will eventually be served. The scope of suspects has varied over the years. In 2012, it was disclosed that focus was on an inmate in a Pennsylvania prison, a former resident of Sunset in 1982. While no formal charges were levied against him, he was deemed a person of interest in relation to the little girl's kidnapping and homicide. Another potential suspect is a man with a criminal background located in New Mexico. Chief Ken Aborn of Sunset Police has noted that evidence does point toward this individual's possible guilt, but it's currently inadequate for a formal arrest. Despite the obstacles, the quest for justice for Rachel is ongoing, and the resolve of her family and the authorities remains unyielding. In May 2016, the park, a silent witness to her abduction, was renamed Rachel Runan Memorial Park. On August 26, during a ceremony filled with emotion, it became a tangible tribute to the little girl's memory. Her commemorative stone, bearing her image and a brief recount of her story, stands within the park's boundaries, the engraving on the stone commemorating her short-lived life. This was not the only significant act in Rachel's memory. In March 2017, Rachel Runan's Missing and Exploited Children's Day became law in Utah, aiming to emphasize child safety in the community annually, inspired by Rachel's story. In 2019, there was renewed hope in Rachel's case when private investigator Jason Jensen began working with the Runan family. Jensen, co-founder of Utah's Cold Case Coalition, focused on a different crime from the 1970s. Witnesses in this unrelated case had provided incorrect information about the suspect's appearance, leading Jason to reconsider the descriptions given in Rachel's case.
Specifically, he pondered if Justin, Rachel's brother, could have misinterpreted the racial identity of the abductor due to his young age and the predominantly white neighborhood they lived in, where interactions with African Americans were limited. Jason discussed with Elaine the possibility that Rachel's brother might have observed a Latino man abducting his sister. Justin never associated the abductor with being African American. He remembered him having a dark complexion and a distinct mustache with a gap or separation in the middle. The authorities, however, had prioritized the description provided by another older child present at the park that day. According to Jason, this misinterpretation possibly misdirected the investigation for almost 4 decades. Correcting this information brought the possibility of identifying a new person of interest, bringing the case closer to a possible resolution. Jason also provided more details about the suspect's car, a 1973 blue-painted car with wood panels on the sides, allowing for more focused search efforts. Soon after the release of the updated sketch of the suspect, a woman came forward with a promising lead stating that her uncle, who had a history of sexual assault and abuse and was in and out of prison, resembled the sketch. He had been released from prison in 1981 and lived in the area at the time of Rachel's abduction, driving a blue-painted car with wood panels, exactly like the one Jason thought was used in Rachel's abduction. However, he had passed away, so without a confession or DNA, there wasn't enough evidence to connect him to Rachel's murder. While the police allegedly took a DNA sample from his daughter to compare with the evidence collected in 2007, the results have not been disclosed. Elaine, since the incident, has devoted her life and Rachel's legacy to preventing other children from suffering the same fate by educating children and parents about the dangers of abductions and crimes. Every year, on the anniversary of Rachel's abduction, her family holds small ceremonies at the park from which she was taken. Now named after her, the case remains unsolved, and these events are used to urge the community to approach the Sunset Police if they have any information about her disappearance or the perpetrator's whereabouts.
Agustina Halbert was born on March 23, 1991, in the province of Buenos Aires, Argentina. She belonged to a well-known family and was the eldest of three daughters of the couple Carolina and Edgardo Halbert, who served as the Secretary of Health of their city. Her uncle, Herman Halbert, held the position of tourism minister and was a pre-candidate for deputy in the Rio Negro region. Consequently, the Halbert family was widely recognized in their province and other regions of Argentina. Those who knew Agustina since her childhood consistently praised her outstanding qualities. She was described as a sensitive, sincere, and loving child who had a passion for dogs and excelled in design, crafts, and decoration. Helen, who shared her adolescence with Agustina, observed her creative talent from a very young age. Helen recalled that when they were in school together, each class was assigned a theme, and Agustina always took the lead in decorating the classroom entrance with her impressive drawings and giant models. While her classmates were cutting and pasting, they followed Agustina's lead because they knew she was steps ahead, creating incredible models. Agustina also had a strong interest in fashion. She even designed the graduation sweaters for her high school class. Those close to her affectionately called her Agos and described her as sociable and an excellent hostess. She loved dressing up, and during her teenage years, her friends often gathered in the garage of her house for pre-dance parties. She would try to introduce her different groups of friends to each other, always striving to connect people. Agustina enjoyed baking and cooking, and she was skilled at it. She had a keen sense of taste and excelled in many things. She had a curious nature, and when something piqued her interest, she pursued it. After completing her secondary education, she initially enrolled in architecture, but later abandoned it. During that time, she focused her energy on fashion design and studied it for a while, but she ultimately changed her direction. Nevertheless, she was a successful young woman who used her knowledge to chase her dreams. She even started her own clothing brand, worked as a model, and was building her career. At some point in her adult life, Agustina's path crossed with Juan Manuel Reverter, with whom she began a relationship that seemed to be going well. Little is known about Juan Manuel's life, and even the names of his parents have not been disclosed. Only a text from an acquaintance referred to them as Moni and Mauricio, and other family details remain unknown. The only accessible information about Juan Manuel is his LinkedIn profile, where he is promoted as a software engineer, a graduate of the National Technological University in Argentina, although his listed place of residence was Toronto and its surroundings in Canada. Interestingly, a search in the university did not reveal him as a graduate. Instead, a resolution from the university's Superior Council in 2017 stated that he had not passed 2 subjects during the periods of 2008 and 2009, which led to him losing his status as a regular student in the field of information systems engineering. Agustina and Juan Manuel's relationship began during the pandemic and was characterized by ups and downs. According to some of her family members, he exhibited psychological violence towards her and was controlling. However, the situation escalated in the summer of 2021, marked by more serious conflicts and violence perpetrated by Juan Manuel against Agustina. Her father shared that she was deeply affected by the relationship, but with the support of her family, she rebuilt her life and had no contact with him for a whole year. Around September 2022, Agustina decided to move to Mexico, specifically to the picturesque beach town of Playa del Carmen in the Riviera Maya, to further her modeling career. She rented an apartment, leaving behind her comfort zone in her native Argentina and putting a considerable distance between herself and Juan Manuel. In Mexico, Agustina lived by doing advertising appearances as a hostess and engaging in modeling activities. She aspired to travel the world while pursuing her modeling career. She loved Playa del Carmen and was genuinely happy there. She found work quickly and was thriving. She had many friendships and the support of a childhood friend who was also living in the area, so Agustina was not alone. Furthermore, she brought her dog with her for emotional support. Agustina's passion for travel was evident in her social media posts. Brazil, New Zealand, China, and European capitals like Madrid, Paris, London, and Brussels were some of the destinations that Agustina had the pleasure of visiting and sharing with her 16,000 followers on Instagram. One of her future plans was to move to Europe. Candela, Agustina's 21-year-old sister, had come to spend the summer in Playa del Carmen. She wanted to enjoy the beautiful Mexican beach area and be close to her older sister. The two decided to share the apartment where Agustina lived because it had 2 rooms, and they would be comfortable. At the end of December, Agustina's ex-boyfriend, Juan Manuel, reappeared. He came to visit her for the holidays. They reconciled, and he stayed to live with both girls. Candela would never have chosen to share an apartment with her sister's boyfriend, but things happened so quickly that before she realized it, the man was settled in Agustina's room. In her recent conversations with her family, Agustina admitted that they had decided to rekindle their relationship and announced that they planned to move to Spain. However, the peace in their relationship was always short-lived. On Thursday, February 16, there was a major argument because Agustina had discovered infidelity. The atmosphere in the apartment was extremely tense. On the afternoon of Friday, February 17, 2023, Candela left her sister alone with Juan Manuel. When she returned the next day at 7 in the morning, she tried to enter her sister's apartment, but the door was locked. She asked the building's doorman if there was any way to enter, and he informed her that screams and a fight had been heard in that apartment during the night. The police had been called twice due to the neighbors' complaints. Candela went back to the apartment and insisted on trying to get in. She entered the access code, but it didn't work. The door was locked from the inside, so she had to knock. After persisting several times, her sister's boyfriend finally got up and opened the door. Almost immediately, Juan Manuel asked Candela where Agustina was, and she criticized him, saying how could she know where her sister was if she had left the previous evening, leaving the couple alone. She insisted that he should know where Agustina was, but he replied that she was sleeping. While they argued, Agustina's small dog began barking, and Candela followed the sound to the bathroom of the apartment. There, she found Agustina with a bathrobe belt around her neck, tied to a hand towel holder that was only 4 feet high. Agustina's sister and her boyfriend untied her and brought her to the living room, where they attempted CPR, but Agustina was already dead. Candela then called the police, and the forensic experts examined the scene and took the body to the morgue, where an autopsy was performed, and she was immediately cremated. The case was initially classified as suicide, and it was considered closed. However, despite the decision of the Mexican justice system, the Halbert family suspected that Agustina's death was actually a murder committed by her boyfriend, and they had their reasons. In late February, Edgardo sent a letter to the Foreign Ministry. The letter that reached the office of the Minister of Foreign Affairs requested action from the competent authorities in Mexico and explained that the family had experienced a situation of helplessness regarding their daughter's death. He detailed that the judicial procedure was riddled with shortcomings because none of the basic protocols were applied to investigate the real causes of her death. The boyfriend was not detained, his phone was not confiscated, and no toxicological tests were conducted, nor were any injuries checked. In addition to all this, the family had no access to the case. Despite efforts by the Argentine consul to obtain copies of the proceedings, he was unsuccessful. Meanwhile, Edgardo recalled that the foreign ministry had an obligation to investigate and punish violence against women and to guarantee the family's right to clarification regarding the circumstances surrounding Agustina's death. Regarding this ongoing case, the foreign ministry's action is of utmost importance because, given the conditions of the investigation in Mexico, Juan Manuel is free to act. Since Agustina's death was classified as suicide, her partner's legal situation is not compromised at the moment, which is why he is not considered a fugitive, but a person of interest for the family. However, it is essential to bear in mind that both Agustina and Juan Manuel are Argentine citizens, and the foreign ministry must ensure the rights of both individuals, even if it is proven that the man committed the crime of which the family of the deceased influencer accuses him. On her part, Carolina, Agustina's mother, embarked on a crusade in the media to seek justice and put pressure on Mexican investigators. She denounced the violent relationship between the victim and her partner. Carolina asserted that her daughter was killed by her boyfriend, and she mentioned in a televised interview that her daughter had been tortured, burned, abused, and beaten, including blows to the head, all prior to her death. She was convinced that he had staged the supposed hanging from a towel rack. Agustina was a tall girl, and she was dressed and ready to go out when Candela found her. According to Carolina, nobody who is contemplating suicide takes the time to get dressed up. She recalled that Juan Manuel had a history of violence. During a press conference shared on social media, it was revealed that the couple had been dealing with ongoing issues that had been kept a secret. She mentioned that the man had never inspired trust, and 2 years earlier, they had rescued Agustina from the apartment she shared with Juan Manuel after a physical assault on her part. She stated that if they hadn't gone to rescue her that day, her daughter would have lost her life at that moment. After that violent incident, Agustina chose not to report it, and her parents decided to respect her decision, although they believed it was best not to let such incidents go unreported to the authorities. The consequences of not taking action at that time were felt 2 years later in Mexico. According to her mother's account, on Friday, February 17, Agustina sent a message at 2:30 p.m. saying that she felt ugly and believed that she did not deserve a man who would hurt her. Carolina provided support from afar and encouraged her to leave the apartment. She reminded her that there was no need to be with that man. She advised her to kick him out of the house and not even get upset about a person who wasn't worth it. In her opinion, her daughter, by returning to that violent man, had played a risky card, and it ended badly, to her regret. The model's uncle, Herman, stated that Juan Manuel's parents had contacted the family and promised to cooperate. However, the dialogue ended when the man did not show up for a Zoom meeting where he was supposed to share his version of the events. Regarding this absence, Carolina said that he had remained in hiding but was likely listening and watching everything to stay informed about the case. In her view, he would have given his version if he had nothing to hide. Angry and frustrated, she said that Juan Manuel's parents were responsible for covering up what she considered a monster. On March 8, International Women's Day, there were marches in Mexico and Argentina, demanding justice for Agustina. This increased pressure on the Mexican prosecutor's office, which announced that it would investigate the death of the Argentine model as a possible femicide. This decision was based on the autopsy report, which showed signs of head and facial injuries, multiple lacerations on the body, and bruises consistent with sexual abuse. A forensic expert hired by the Halbert family analyzed the official report and pointed out various signs of violence, such as punch marks on the mouth and a significant head injury. Additionally, The forensic expert noted lacerations in several parts of the body and internal and external hematomas, suggesting recent and non-consensual sexual activity. However, the only available evidence is this forensic report because, as mentioned earlier, the Mexican authorities proceeded to cremate Agustina's body shortly after classifying the case as suicide. Following the mobilizations on International Women's Day, the Mexican justice system announced that it had reclassified the case, originally labeled as suicide, and had begun investigating it as a possible femicide. The family's lawyer stated that the case had been referred to a special unit equipped to handle such cases. She further accused the main suspect, Juan Manuel, of attempting to stage a suicide and highlighted signs of violence at the scene. The apartment was locked from the inside. There were visible injuries on both the victim and her partner. A table leg was found out of place and on the floor, and 2 calls had been made to the police the previous night. She also criticized the judicial investigation, revealing that the crime scene had not been properly secured, contrary to protocol. It was essential for the scene and the victim's body to be preserved until the investigation concluded. She added that due to numerous errors, information that could have been obtained from the devices was lost since the perpetrator took the cell phones and all the data with him. The investigation into Agustina's violent death in Mexico promises to be a challenging journey for the family, which has been following the case from Argentina, more than 7,000 kilometers away, with a different legal system and culture. New statements were made by the prosecutor of the state of Quintana Roo on March 13, 2023, asserting that the Argentine model and influencer had taken her own life parishionment, and scientifically. These declarations were made during a press conference held by the security cabinet of that Mexican province. The prosecutor detailed that there was a history of violence both before and during her relationship with her partner. He stated that it could not be ruled out that Juan Manuel might have induced her to take her own life, and that could be a matter of investigation. When questioned by journalists about the cigarette burns on the woman's body, he assured that these injuries occurred before her suicide. He explained that there had been violence the night before her death between her and her partner, and there was sufficient evidence of this. Regarding Juan Manuel, the prosecutor stated that he had been interviewed by the investigative police, and at that time, they did not have enough evidence for an arrest or any other legal action against him. However, this did not mean that he would not be pursued later if a connection to Agustina's death could be established. Edgardo, Agustina's father, insisted on the need to change the classification of the case, as their lawyer had found numerous pieces of evidence to classify it as femicide. When asked by an Argentine media about the prosecutor's statements, Herman, the victim's uncle, expressed that they were not surprised that the Attorney General was defending the suicide theory because acknowledging that there were many elements suggesting femicide would mean admitting their failures. He believed that the prosecution had acted clumsily and hastily in the early stages of the investigation, leading to the loss of crucial evidence. However, as the case was transferred to the specialized unit, it indicated that something had gone wrong, as it is not common to replace a team that had performed well. He argued that the prosecutor was trying to defend the initial theory because going in a different direction would be an acknowledgement of their poor work. Gerardo Reynoso, a journalist, provided details of the judicial process. He explained that the Prosecutor General's office reclassified the death as femicide due to pressure from Agustina's family, the lawyer, and a feminist march on March 8th. However, in the subsequent hours, the justice system announced that they were still considering the suicide theory. He highlighted that, in general, the prosecutor's office did not want to validate the independent expert opinion that had found injuries compatible with femicide. Recognizing this would mean accepting that someone outside the prosecutor's office had solved a problem they should have handled with a properly executed expert analysis. Regarding Juan Manuel's situation, he pointed out that the prosecutor's office would have to call the boyfriend to discuss the case. In the event of her suicide, he would inevitably be part of the investigation, at least in the statements that should have been taken to determine what had happened. To make matters worse, The journalist emphasized that the crime was discovered on a weekend and during weekends in Mexico. Intern trainees and junior investigators typically handle duties. This could have been the reason why everything was mishandled. He believed that their actions were not malicious, but rather due to a lack of experience, and this was reflected in how the case was handled. Some days later, in Argentina, news surfaced about a call received by Agustina's father. A couple of days after the Women's Day March, a prosecutor from Quintana Roo contacted Edgardo by telephone on the instruction of the state prosecutor office, who wanted to speak with the family. Before hearing from the father, the person on the phone, speaking on behalf of others whose identities were unclear, stated that the system wanted to apologize for what had happened. They emphasize that if Agustina's boyfriend bore any responsibility, they would certainly prosecute, as there was no intention within the prosecutor's office to cover up anything. They added that if any public servant from the prosecutor's office was found responsible, measures would be taken. He also quickly clarified that he would organize a meeting with the general prosecutor and a team of experts to show the father what they had. He stated that the general prosecutor had instructed that other state agencies in Mexico should also review the autopsy. Then the prosecutor, who had been speaking gently, abruptly shifted his tone and raised a complaint. He mentioned that it had been claimed that they did not follow the femicide protocol, and he argued that every death of a woman was worked on according to the femicide protocol. Edgardo also dropped the formality and transitioned from being a grieving father to one demanding justice for Agustina. After asking the prosecutor for his name, he directly addressed him as Carlos and firmly presented his point of view on the matter. He told him that if supposed experts found a young girl deceased in the situation she was in, hanging with a man inside the residence, and they didn't detain that man, didn't take his statement, and didn't seize his phone, then the investigation left much to be desired. He added that after reviewing the autopsy and witnessing what his daughter had endured, the conclusion for him was that everything had failed, a 100% failure, because his daughter had died. The latest information came at the end of March, just days before the one-month anniversary of Agustina's death. The hypotheses of suicide and femicide are still being pursued on separate tracks. Halbert's lawyer said that the case had been transferred to the Women's Crimes Division, meaning Agustina's case is now on the femicide and gender violence table. She continued to work with the prosecutor handling the case and focused solely on demonstrating the femicide angle, providing more evidence, and investigating the boyfriend's involvement. She apologized for not being able to provide more details, but explained that all leads related to the murder were under seal. Regarding the question of when Juan Manuel could be arrested, the lawyer stated that it would depend on the conclusion of the investigation and that it was up to the prosecutor to determine if sufficient evidence had been provided or if more was needed. However, she reiterated her confidence in being able to prove everything. Neighbors reported hearing screams until around 2:30 in the morning. According to statements obtained after that time, silence prevailed at the scene. The time of death listed in the incomplete autopsy report is 4 a.m. While Agustina's family continues to demand justice, the alleged perpetrator is in an unknown location. Although the Mexican justice system has not issued an arrest warrant against him, and no judicial proceedings have been opened in Argentina because the alleged crime occurred in another country, he remains free. However, he has not made himself visible and has not faced the family of the girlfriend he supposedly loved and lived with until the day of her death. This case is still in development, but due to its preliminary stage, many proceedings are conducted discreetly and away from the media. The prosecutor's office investigating the alleged femicide issued a document to determine Reverter's whereabouts. The order was issued on June 7th by the Specialized Prosecutor's Office for the Investigation and Prosecution of Femicide to search for, locate, and request Reverter's presentation without depriving him of his freedom. As stated, the goal is to expand their interview to gather more information and comply with this authority's request. Juan Fernando Hermosa Suarez came into the world on February 28, 1976, amidst the picturesque province of Sucumbios in Ecuador. His early life was shrouded in mystery, with no concrete information about his biological father and his mother, a humble laundry worker, struggling to provide for him. Consequently, when Juan was just a year old, destiny intervened, leading to his adoption by Rafael Hermosa and Zoila Suarez, a compassionate couple longing for children. They resided in a small and tranquil city in Ecuador until 1982, when a significant change transpired. Rafael sold their farm, and the family relocated to Quito, the vibrant capital of Ecuador. Initially, Juan's life appeared to follow a typical trajectory. He experienced the ups and downs of childhood, marked by occasional erratic moods. However, a pivotal moment occurred when he was around 7 years old. A young girl named Gloria entered the Hermosa family's life, altering its course. Gloria, at the tender age of 14, unveiled a startling revelation. She was Juan's sister. Gloria sought refuge with the Hermosa family, as her stepfather had cast her aside. Rafael and Zoila, known for their compassion, welcomed Gloria into their home. As time passed, Gloria found herself alone with Juan and chose to share a life-altering secret. Juan was adopted. This revelation, delivered without much consideration for his age and emotional readiness, left Juan grappling with profound questions. Gloria's presence also brought strife into the household, as she frequently disparaged Rafael and Zoila to Juan. Her tales included speculations about theft and flight from their home. Gloria's turbulent and disruptive behavior made it difficult for her to coexist with the Hermosa family, and she soon moved on. Juan's response to this revelation was tumultuous. As he mustered the courage to confront his adoptive parents, tears welled up in his eyes. He posed the painful question of whether it was true that Rafael and Zoila were not his biological parents. Faced with the heart-wrenching truth, they had no choice but to share the details of Juan's adoption. Some people have the notion that criminal behavior can be attributed solely to the influence of one's upbringing. In this case, Juan's adoptive parents, though imperfect, made sincere efforts to guide him down the right path. Nevertheless, it became increasingly evident that Juan's trajectory was far from conventional. Juan's journey took a tumultuous turn as he spiraled into rebellion. Crossing the boundary of typical childhood behavior at the tender age of 9, it was during these formative years that he began a disturbing pattern of animal cruelty, primarily targeting cats. He would macabrely bring their lifeless remains to school, seeking to shock and garner attention. Unsurprisingly, these actions resulted in multiple expulsions from school. In an attempt to curb his unruly behavior, Rafael, his adoptive father, resorted to occasional corporal punishment. Yet his discipline never escalated to a level that could be deemed excessive. In fact, it was evident that Juan did not hold any lingering grudges against Rafael or Zoila, his adoptive mother. Rafael's work commitments frequently led him to travel, leaving Juan with more unsupervised time. Although Zoila provided some company, her hearing impairment and struggles with arthritis prevented her from being a constant presence. Consequently, Juan found himself increasingly isolated. Completing elementary school at the age of 12 was a significant accomplishment for Juan, given his penchant for petty theft. He had already embarked on a path of pilfering, selling whatever items he could lay his hands on. Remarkably, his criminal endeavors thus far had entailed relatively low levels of risk. However, at the age of 13, Juan became embroiled in a reckless car theft escapade alongside older boys. Assuming the role of a passenger, they initially evaded capture. Their audacious greed, however, led them to steal yet another vehicle, resulting in their apprehension. Juan's subsequent placement in a juvenile correctional facility underscored the urgent need for reform within these institutions. In the majority of cases, these facilities only serve to further entrench delinquent behavior, treating these young individuals as hardened criminals. The meager mental assistance provided took the form of disconnected lectures, falling short of addressing their unique needs. Ultimately, these facilities inadvertently fostered camaraderie among these youths, often amplifying the influence of the already deeply troubled. Contrary to expectations, Juan found himself targeted within the correctional facility, not due to his physical stature or menacing appearance, but as a victim of severe bullying. Physical assaults and harsh verbal taunts became a daily ordeal. Amid this grim backdrop, a fellow inmate named Luis Anibal, merely 2 months older than Juan, entered the scene. Sharing a background of financial hardship, Luis's mother worked as a cleaner, but he had not been placed for adoption. Luis's circumstances were even more dire, with an abusive stepfather, mistreatment of his mother, and his sister subjected to similar horrors. Luis Anibal found himself on a perilous path marked by thefts and altercations, eventually leading him to the correctional facility. His presence there was not the consequence of a specific crime, but rather a desperate measure enacted by his mother, who hoped to redirect him onto the right track, only to inadvertently exacerbate his situation. Extended stays in the correctional facility, combined with shared experiences and a profound sense of disconnection from mainstream society, brought together these young men who struggled to forge connections elsewhere. In a bold endeavor, they even hired a taxi driver on an hourly basis to impart driving lessons. In no time, they became proficient behind the wheel of a car, coincidentally a taxi. The prospect of learning to drive infused these young men with excitement, for it heralded the initiation of their car theft endeavors. Their maiden foray into auto theft involved the Hyundai Accent, a venture that left no casualties, except for Juan and Anibal themselves, who, presumably due to nerves, met with a road mishap. Providentially, their escapade went unnoticed, and they managed to elude capture. Their subsequent car theft also ended in an encounter with law enforcement. However, they had meticulously prepared for such an eventuality, carrying counterfeit credentials purporting them to be the offspring of officers stationed in Quito. It goes without saying that these claims were entirely fabricated, unbeknownst to the genuine officers. Fortuitously for the boys, they were intercepted by a sergeant and a corporal who were unacquainted with the officers they impersonated, hence readily accepting the spurious credentials. Inquisitive officers questioned the boys about the car, intuitively discerning that it was unusual for the child of an officer to possess such a vehicle. Displaying remarkable cunning, the boys explained that it was a stolen car their father had managed to recover. The officers, harboring suspicions, suggested changing the vehicle's tires. It's important to note that some may not be familiar with the prevalent practice in Latin America, where police recover stolen cars, strip them of valuable parts for resale, and subsequently lay blame on the thieves for causing damage to the vehicle. The boys consented, offering to replace any components with lower quality substitutes in exchange for monetary compensation. The officers agreed, and an arrangement that left all parties content ensued. This modus operandi persisted for a while, initially yielding limited results. While leaving a disco with friends on November 22, 1991, the Juan and his group took a taxi. Hermosa pulled out a pistol obtained through a guard, shooting the driver in the head and killing him instantly. One of his friends then drove the vehicle to the southeast of the city and disposed of the body in the Los Chios Valley, where the body was found by police the next day. A week later, Hermosa went with other members of his gang to a hairdresser where he usually fixed his hair, operated by a transgender named Charlie. Charlie invited them to drink at home, where they started an argument which ended in Hermosa shooting Charlie 5 times before he could ask for help. Hermosa's crimes totaled 22 murders, occurring in only 4 months, claiming the lives of 8 taxi drivers, 11 homosexuals, a truck driver and his acquaintance, as well as 2 others, earning him the nickname the Kid of Terror. The victims were shot to death with a pistol, the crimes occurring during the weekends, which caused a panic among the taxi drivers and homosexuals who lived in northern Quito. One fateful morning, patrolling officers were alerted by what sounded like gunshots, prompting them to initiate the strategic sweep of the vicinity. Guided by the direction of the gunshots, they arrived on an almost deserted street, where a taxi was observed traversing the area. Reacting swiftly, the officers accelerated, overtaking the taxi and discerning the presence of several minors inside. Recognizing that the police were in pursuit, the young individuals accelerated, yet the officers were undeterred, maintaining their vigilance. And when they realized that escaping in the taxi wasn't going to be possible, they stopped and opened all 4 doors to run in opposite directions. They were only able to capture one suspect, and that was Luis Aníbal. Luis was taken to the police station, and they began questioning him to get a confession, but he didn't utter a single word. Days passed, along with threats because the taxi he fled from belonged to a man who had been murdered a few hours earlier. Still, Luis remained silent until a group of boys came to visit him to see what was going on with him. This seemed odd to the police because they had kept this capture hidden, and only a few relatives knew that Luis was there. These boys, seeing that Luis couldn't get out, left the place. But the officers, seeing that the presumed suspects were minors, and their profile matched perfectly, assigned an undercover officer to see what their next moves would be. Throughout the day, the detective saw that these boys seemed to spend the whole day together, hanging out in the streets. In the evening, they entered a nightclub, and more agents were called to see if they would take the bait that was about to be set. In the early morning, when the boys left the nightclub, a taxi passed nearby, and they stopped it. Several agents were already following the taxi, and indeed, these boys had the intention of assaulting the taxi driver, but he was also an agent, and practically the whole gang of terror was captured. But their leader, Juan, had not been with them. Under pressure, the boys confessed, but they claimed they were not responsible for the murders and that Juan Carlos was the culprit. Juan Carlos was the name Juan Fernando used to have a different identity as a criminal and protect his real identity. In contrast, Luis used the alias Santiago. The police began to investigate Juan Fernando Hermosa and found his address. At that time, Juan lived with Zoila, and Rafael was not at home. On January 14, 1992, in the early morning, several officers began to surround Juan's house and entered through a skylight. Juan realized this, grabbed his gun, and a shootout ensued. Unfortunately, since he was sleeping in the same bed with his mother, and she may not have heard due to her deafness, she stayed in bed. In the exchange of fire, Zoila was hit by 19 bullets, leading to her death. Juan attempted to escape, threw a grenade at the police, and when he was climbing out of a window to escape, he was captured. Subsequently, following Juan's grenade launch, testimonies surfaced from both Juan and the neighbors, attesting that it was, in fact, the police who had lobbed the grenade. Countless enigmas envelop the circumstances leading to Zoila's tragic fate. It raises questions about why she was swiftly transported away in an ambulance when it was patently evident that she had already departed from this world. Standard procedure dictates that when someone is unmistakably deceased, they should remain at the scene for forensic evaluation. Upon his arrival at the police precinct, Juan unambiguously declared, as I quote, "I want to clarify that my name is Juan Fernando Hermosa Suarez, and on February 28th, I will celebrate my 16th birthday." This stratagem was employed to exploit legal provisions, given his status as a minor, and it elicited an explosion of media coverage. Juan ascended to a newfound level of notoriety, capturing the headlines in every newspaper. On numerous occasions, he participated in interviews for which he received compensation. Juan took all the blame for himself and wanted to leave his companions out of it. However, seeing that he also didn't want to receive many years in prison, he began to create excuses, claiming that a supposed general, who does exist, had hired him to commit all these crimes because of the death of his daughter, which was attributed to a supposed taxi driver. This was taken seriously because the other kids also started saying the same thing. The authorities were so stirred by this that they seriously began to investigate the general. They asked these kids about how he looked, and they said he was of average height and had prominent hair, but that wasn't accurate. He was tall and always had a military haircut. It also makes perfect sense that a general with all the connections in the world would hire a 15-year-old kid like Juan, who was a complete stranger. The authorities dismissed the accusations, and Juan began to make more excuses. Now he claimed that the taxi drivers were responsible for their own deaths. Clearly, he was still a child. He insisted that the last thing he wanted was to kill. He stated, "I asked them to stay still, that nothing would happen to them. But that didn't happen. Once again, I was threatened with a revolver, so I used my weapon. And a taxi driver tried to hit me with a lug wrench, so I was also forced to shoot." But even if that were true, this excuse wouldn't hold up because he had murdered 22 people by that point. There was no way he could be saved because he was young. It's not like he was suddenly going to turn his life around, and Juan confirmed this. At the time of his trial, Juan was already 16 years old and was sentenced to just 4 years at an orientation center because that was the maximum penalty for a minor in Ecuador. Juan underwent several psychological exams, which mostly described him as an organized psychopath. This type of psychopath tends to be natural leaders, and it was within 16 months of being in that center that Juan formed a gang and devised a plan to escape. He had a girl who had accompanied him in a previous taxi robbery arranged to meet him on the day of his visits. They had agreed that she would deliver a pistol to him so he could escape. In a juvenile center, the security wasn't as high, and Juan knew that at some point there would only be one guard watching the exit. When this happened, he seized the opportunity and shot the sole remaining guard with 5 shots, causing his death. Immediately, Juan and 10 other young people managed to escape from there. The news once again exploded, and somehow, Juan quickly managed to escape to Colombia, reaching Bogota. He began to live off the sale of stolen jewelry, but being in a new country where he was also being pursued, he couldn't steal as easily as he could in Ecuador. So shortly after, he was found, and tired of going hungry, he told the police, "Yes, I am Juan Fernando Hermosa," and he was sent back to Ecuador. He was temporarily placed in a high-security cell, but was soon returned to the same orientation center from which he had escaped before. However, this time, he didn't escape again. He didn't even serve the initial 4-year sentence they had given him, despite having killed a guard and escaped to Colombia. Many couldn't believe it, but in January 1996, Juan was already free. And this obviously caused a lot of resentment in many people who saw the judicial system as a failure. Juan returned to his childhood town, where he began to live with Rafael. In the early days, Juan seemed enthusiastic about finding a job, but no one wanted to hire him until Rafael contacted a friend who could give Juan a job in a bus collecting money. He started working and gradually began to enjoy the nightlife again, although it is assumed that he only went out to party and consume alcohol. On February 26, 1996, Juan had gone out with some friends to a bar around 10 p.m. At 12, the bar owner asked him to leave because the more the other customers consumed alcohol, the more they expressed their disgust for Juan, as his face and what he had done were known throughout the country. He had no choice but to board a bus and leave. 2 days later, Rafael received a call from the police, informing him that they had found what appeared to be his son's body near a river. The body was unrecognizable, not due to decomposition, but because it had been beaten, tortured, and assaulted in every possible way, even run over by a car, with his hands tied with wire. He was only identified as Juan because he had his identification in his pockets, and next to the body, they had left a newspaper clipping that said, The Hermosa syndrome throughout the country. The body was found on the same day that Juan was supposed to turn 20. Some say that the perpetrators were contacts of the officers he had deals with, but it could have been anyone because this young man had made enemies from all sides. Maryanne Bachmeier was born on June 3, 1950, in Sarstedt, West Germany. Her family ended up there following the public persecution and scrutiny her father faced for being a former official of the German National Socialist Party. During World War II, he was a member of the notorious SS. As a result, Maryanne was raised in a very conservative home by deeply religious tutors. It's said that she never had a happy childhood due to a lack of close relationship with her parents. Her father was authoritarian, abusive, and an alcoholic, often spending more time at a bar near their home than with his family. Maryanne's mother was also distant, rarely speaking or spending time with her daughter. The situation worsened due to her father's drinking, which increased his aggression towards the family. This ended with the parents' divorce and the father leaving the house. Maryanne thought she could finally be free and happy, but soon her mother remarried another abusive man. Unfortunately, instead of Maryanne and her mother uniting against the man, they both turned against Maryanne, blaming her for the family's problems. This broke their relationship, and Maryanne, seen as a troublesome teenager, was eventually kicked out of the house. During her adolescence, Maryanne faced multiple assaults from different men, leading to the birth of her first child at just 16. She was forced to give the baby up for adoption due to lack of resources and because the baby's father abandoned her. 2 years later, Maryanne got pregnant again by her then abusive boyfriend. Despite the circumstances, she wanted to keep the baby, but before the child's birth, she experienced another traumatic assault at a nightclub. Her boyfriend left her, and she gave up this second child for adoption as well. Later, Maryanne dropped out of school and sought work to support herself. She started working at a bar named Tipasa, where she met the manager, and after some time, they became a couple. At 22, she became pregnant with her third child and felt ready to raise the baby with some resources and a home. However, her then boyfriend disagreed with her decision, ending their relationship. Maryanne, firm in her choice, decided to raise her daughter, Anna, alone, despite her parents' demands to give her up for adoption like her previous children. After Anna's birth, Maryanne vowed to be a good mother and underwent a tubal ligation, a common practice at the time to prevent overpopulation. Maryanne and Anna lived together in Lübeck, Germany, and despite challenges, they made it through. Indeed, Maryanne was happy because her daughter was the only person in her life who did not intend to harm her, unlike her parents or ex-partners. However, raising Anna alone meant Maryanne had to take her to work at the bar, so she could only attend to her daughter during her few breaks. Years later, people close to Maryanne would say that she treated Anna like a little adult and expected her to take care of many things on her own from a young age. Anna often slept in the bar while Maryanne was working, and a friend described Anna as a very vibrant and creative child who unfortunately never had a pleasant family life, as she only occasionally saw her father at the bar. Some stories also mention that Maryanne worked late into the night and then slept all day, leaving her 7-year-old daughter alone for much of the day. Anna used this time to play around the neighborhood alone, greeting people and playing with their pets. It was even mentioned that Maryanne was aware of her problematic lifestyle and sometimes contemplated the idea of giving Anna up for adoption. This leads us to May 5, 1980, where it is unclear exactly what happened that morning between Anna and Maryanne. Some say they argued because Anna woke up in a bad mood and stubbornly did not want to go to school but wanted to play in the park, which Maryanne did not allow. There's another version where Anna asked permission from her mother to skip school to play in the park with friends, and Maryanne eventually let her go, not suspecting her daughter's real intentions to play elsewhere. Regardless, Anna was playing outside when the ensuing events turned into a tragedy in Maryanne's life. When Maryanne returned home later that day, she found it strange not to find her daughter anywhere but decided to wait a few more hours for her return. As time passed and Anna did not return, Maryanne started searching the neighborhood. She asked Anna's friends and locals if they knew anything about her daughter, but nobody knew anything. It was as if she had vanished into thin air. So Maryanne reported this anomaly to the police. The next day, a very upset and nervous woman arrived at the police. It seemed that this man, Klaus Grabowski, 35 years old, was overcome with guilt after the act and couldn't find peace. He ended up confessing in detail what happened to his girlfriend. This caused a great argument, after which he left, confused, to go to a bar for a beer. His girlfriend took this opportunity to go to the police station to report him. The truth was that Anna had been abducted by Klaus, who owned a butcher shop near Maryanne's house. Anna had gone there intending to play because the man had promised her that she could play with his cats whenever she wanted to visit. Innocently, Anna went and rang the doorbell. Klaus received her and kept her in his house for several hours, assaulting her multiple times until finally, to prevent the child from confessing the facts, he ended her life by suffocation with a pair of his girlfriend's stockings. Klaus Grabowski had a history of criminal activities and had previously been convicted for the assault of 2 young girls. He was known to have a troubled past. In 1973, he attacked a 6-year-old girl and was charged with attempted murder. 2 years later, he faced charges for these crimes, leading to a psychological evaluation. The results indicated he had an abnormal sexual instinct and significantly limited capacity to control it. Consequently, he was sent to a psychological treatment center instead of prison. A few years later, Klaus was offered the option of undergoing a controversial chemical castration procedure in exchange for early release, which he readily accepted. This procedure involved administering drugs to reduce libido and testosterone levels, reducing the likelihood of reoffending. Klaus preferred this option over returning to a mental health facility. It was a common practice for offenders of such crimes, often resulting in reduced sentences under the assumption that they no longer posed a societal threat. Despite the reversibility of this procedure, Klaus was released soon after undergoing it, without subsequent psychological evaluations. 2 years later, he underwent hormonal treatment to reverse the chemical castration, increasing his testosterone levels. This treatment was approved by the court under the pretext that he wanted to start a family with his girlfriend and lead a normal life, thus misleading everyone about his true nature. On the day of the incident, authorities quickly headed to Klaus's residence, but couldn't find him. He had taken Anna's body and left a note for his girlfriend, asking her to meet him at a bar that night to discuss the situation. The police took this opportunity to wait for Klaus at the bar and arrested him upon his arrival. After his arrest, Klaus claimed he had no intention of inappropriately touching Anna. He despicably defended himself by alleging that the child tried to seduce and extort him, and fear of returning to jail drove him to end her life. He claimed Anna had threatened to tell her mother he had inappropriately touched her, a claim he insisted was false and made with the intent to extort money from him. Klaus revealed he had hidden the body in a cardboard box near a canal. When the police informed Maryanne about her daughter's whereabouts and tragic demise, she was devastated. However, the trial brought further anguish. Maryanne was forced to hear testimonies and descriptions about her life and Anna's, suggesting that Anna was practically raised on the streets and that such an incident was inevitable due to Maryanne's negligence as a bar waitress who worked late nights and neglected her daughter. This left Maryanne heartbroken and furious, particularly tormented by the possibility that Anna's killer might not receive the maximum penalty due to potential claims of mental health issues, which could allow him to avoid prison. Consequently, Maryanne silently began to devise a plan to avenge her daughter's death, regardless of the consequences. During the trial, Klaus Grabowski repeatedly claimed that Anna had seduced and extorted him for money, insisting that his actions were driven by the fear of returning to jail. His defense also centered around the idea that the hormonal treatment he was undergoing significantly affected him and led to violent outbursts. Frustrated and injured by these lies, Maryanne decided to buy a gun and secretly practice shooting. Every time Maryanne attended the trial, her displeasure was evident, especially when she heard statements that defamed her 7-year-old daughter. At one point, she expressed clear anger, unable to bear listening to Klaus and his lawyer's fabrications. However, the trial took a dramatic turn on its third day, March 6, 1981. Maryanne arrived at the courtroom later than usual, entering with an expressionless face. She walked with an upright posture, her hands in the pockets of her white coat. Unbeknownst to others, she had managed to bypass the strict security measures of the judicial establishment with a pistol in her pocket. As the judge and others in the courtroom carried on with the proceedings, Klaus, with his back to Maryanne, faced the judge. At this moment, Maryanne stood still, her nerves palpable. She seized the opportunity to act when Klaus stood up to give his statement. Maryanne pulled out the pistol and fired 7 shots, 6 of which struck Klaus, causing him to collapse. The precision of her shots was noted by many. Maryanne remained expressionless throughout, slightly moving her lips as she fired. She made no attempt to flee and did not resist when the courtroom security detained her. Maryanne was heard saying, "That pig killed my daughter. He shot her in the face, but I shot him in the back. I hope he's dead." Her wish was confirmed when an officer checked Klaus and declared him dead. Upon hearing this, a look of relief crossed Maryanne's face, contrasting her previous expressions. However, Maryanne now faced her own trial, which would not be easy to escape. Those who witnessed the incident noted that Maryanne seemed to be in a trance, struggling to comprehend her actions. The forensic psychiatrist examined her, asking her to write something to analyze her handwriting and mental state. Maryanne wrote, "I did it for Anna," surrounding the sentence with 7 hearts, possibly representing each year of Anna's life. The next day, German newspapers displayed Maryanne's photo, dubbing her the Avenging Mother. The case became the most well-known instance of vigilante justice in West Germany, garnering extensive media coverage. Television crews from across Europe rushed to report on the case, highlighting its extraordinary and tragic nature. Maryanne was quickly brought to trial for murder. During her trial, she testified that she was not fully aware of her actions, claiming she was in a trance and even had a dream where she saw Anna walking through the courtrooms. She also mentioned her mental health had deteriorated significantly following the events. Maryanne then told a lie that likely worsened her standing with the judge. She claimed she had bought the gun to end her own life, but no one believed she hadn't premeditated her actions and practiced with the weapon before using it in court. Many people in Germany and around the world supported Maryanne for taking matters into her own hands, as they felt the system had failed by previously freeing Klaus and authorizing his hormonal treatment without proper evaluation. They saw it as fair to set her free. However, there were also those who viewed Maryanne as a criminal who had taken justice into her own hands in the worst possible way, labeling her a murderer. Others judged her for being an irresponsible mother who had given up her other 2 children for adoption and committed a cold-blooded crime that could have harmed others in the process. With all this controversy and mixed feelings, Maryanne was charged with murder in a judicial process for the death of Klaus Grabowski on November 2, 1982. The prosecution later withdrew the charge, and after 28 days of negotiations, the jury reached a verdict. In March 1983, Maryanne was convicted of involuntary manslaughter and illegal possession of a firearm, sentenced to 6 years in prison. 3 years later, the authorities reconsidered, believing she didn't deserve any sentence. Soon after, Maryanne sold her life story for about 250,000 German marks in an exclusive to a news magazine, stating she did it to pay off the debts caused by the judicial process. Following the fall of the Berlin Wall, she returned to a now unified Germany after being diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. During this time, Maryanne was interviewed by various media outlets, often placed in tense situations with questions comparing her to Klaus, as both were murderers. Despite this, she maintained her composure, stating she did what she did to ensure Klaus faced justice for his actions against the 7-year-old girl, even as he continued to spread lies about her in his final moments. Knowing her illness was terminal, Maryanne asked a reporter to accompany her with a movie camera until her last moments. Maryanne passed away at the age of 46 on September 17, 1996, from pancreatic cancer. She was buried next to her daughter Anna's grave in the Lübeck cemetery. Rosa del Carmen Verduzco was born in 1934 in Zamora, Mexico, into a wealthy and well-positioned family within the community. She and her 4 siblings received a good education due to their status. Money was not a concern for the Verduzcos, but something about this privileged reality troubled Rosa's mind. While she and her family could afford anything they wanted and enjoy a good life, thanks to her father's ability to run commercial businesses, other children faced harsher realities. This seemed unacceptable to her, and from the moment she became aware of it, a compelling need to make a change about the issue that bothered her was born. Even at a young age, she understood that it was up to her to make a difference. However, this task would not be easy, as she came from a strict family, and she knew it well. It was rumored among the inhabitants of Zamora that in her preteens, Rosa had fallen in love with a laborer, and her parents did everything possible to stop the progression of that relationship. At that time, Rosa had no choice but to accept her parents' order to distance herself from that man. Outraged by what she had to endure, she swore she would never marry, but she would have children. One day, while walking through the streets of her city, she met a boy slightly younger than her, who was 13 at the time, living in the open. Rosa felt she could not turn a blind eye and had to remedy the terrible situation the boy was going through, rescuing him from poverty. She took him to live in her house with her family, so he could finally rest under a roof and have a meal on the table. Her parents refused, considering her too young to face such a responsibility, but they eventually agreed to receive him due to her persistence. For time, this activity became a habit for Rosa, or rather, her passion. After a few months, the number of children living under her care had multiplied. Amidst this turmoil in the Verduzco household, her father passed away. Although this terrible event deeply affected Rosa, she saw it as an opportunity to fully pursue her dream. So then, she convinced her mother to buy her a house where she could shelter and help more children. On one hand, Rosa was just as young as her rescued children and also needed adult care, but on the other hand, she would no longer have to occupy her own space. This was how Rosa settled in her first home, but she experienced firsthand what it was like to live without money or food. Far from being an impediment, she went out to walk the streets of the city with the other children to earn their daily food. Her dream was coming true as more and more children arrived at the home under her wing. The shelter began to receive donations from residents and prominent personalities who were moved by Rosa's altruism, allowing her to gather the necessary funds to buy a larger plot of land and build a shelter with much more capacity, the same shelter that years later became known as La Gran Familia. Rosa Verduzco's work was quickly recognized by the population, who were inspired by her commitment and devotion to the care of minors, and consequently, donations soon appeared: food, school supplies, cleaning products, and money, among other things, made it possible to maintain the place that Rosa and her children built with their own hands. In 1947, La Gran Familia opened its doors, but it was in 1973 that the establishment became a civil association, not only receiving street children but also those whose parents could not maintain them due to various difficulties, or who were affected by substance abuse. Keeping them under a roof was one of the objectives, but the priority of the shelter was to provide them with the necessary education to allow them to be professional and independent individuals in the future. For this reason, they had an educational program including primary, secondary, high school, and even university extension careers, recognized and validated by the government. In addition to conventional training, the minors attended physical education classes, sewing workshops, and many more categories. However, one of the most outstanding and proudest for Rosa was musical learning. The children residing in the establishment had to learn to play an instrument or sing. Thanks to this, a large orchestra was formed that did not miss a celebration without presenting their musical number. La Gran Familia gained great popularity, reaching the ears of many politicians who decided to support and get involved in the project. Governors like Vicente Fox and Felipe Calderon, to name a few, became great admirers and allies of Rosa Verduzco. The work carried out there was so recognized that even during a visit by Queen Elizabeth of England to Mexico, she requested to meet Rosa Verduzco, in addition to donating a bus for transporting the children and money to build a gymnasium. Rosa agreed to the meeting, but added a condition to the Queen's request. She was willing to receive her if the children could be present at the venue and share a meal with her and the prince consort, as well as offer them a musical number. Rosa Verduzco made it happen. It was known that with her undeniable determination, she could achieve everything she wanted, and she had already proven it over decades. Thanks to that defining character, over the years, hundreds of children were welcomed into that home. All were received. However, as often happens in such cases, not everyone was very happy with her way of being. Rosa Verduzco faced controversies from the beginning of her project. One of the first reasons she was criticized concerned the location of the shelter, as it was located in an affluent area of the city. Her neighbors were not willing to share space with an establishment that, at first glance, looked deplorable, as it had been built by inexperienced hands, and occasionally some walls would crumble and had to be rebuilt. However, there were more terrifying reasons to judge what happened at La Gran Familia. Amid so much kindness and generosity seemed to hide a secret that only those behind those doors seemed to know, or at least someone that no one dared to tell, for fear of Rosa's reprisals. It was very common among the neighbors of the city to see her in the streets with a group of children. Some were sent to beg for money or sell newspapers to collect money. Meanwhile, others, the more privileged or at least chosen by her, accompanied her to have a chocolate she invited them to. But it was on these occasions that Rosa's authoritarian character became visible to those outside the shelter. In popular celebrations, when the town gathered in the streets, Rosa sent the children to ask for toys and authorized them to bite people who refused to give them anything. On the other hand, Merchants or anyone who crossed her path were obligated to make some type of donation that Rosa demanded. The woman had the freedom to do and undo. It was evident that she had a power that exceeded her good intentions of running a home for children. Soon, the inhabitants of the city realized who this popular personality really was. She was greatly admired to the extent that parents threatened their misbehaving children with sending them to Rosa's place, as if that was the worst punishment they could receive. Everyone was aware and divided between those who praised her and those who hated her. However, what seemed unnoticed by the authorities was the actual happenings at the shelter, as no one dared to even visit the place occasionally to ensure it was operating according to governmental regulations. For 60 years, Rosa operated with perpetual impunity, aided by a corrupt system that delegated to one person the work others were incapable of doing. But the truth hidden beneath her kindness and generosity was unmasked in July 2014, after receiving more than 50 complaints from people external to the shelter and survivors of that hell. The Attorney General's Office of the Republic intervened at La Gran Familia to begin an intense search. Families of people who had been through the place and those who had experienced the mistreatments recounted to authorities about extreme conditions of insalubrity, carnal abuses, physical punishments, and deprivation of freedom. During the search at La Gran Familia, the police confirmed a huge amount of spoiled food that was provided to the children, which consequently led to severe cases of malnutrition. Among the testimonies, a survivor recounted being forced to eat flies just to get something in his stomach. Furthermore, other horrifying confessions reported that an endless number of crimes occurred there, threatening the integrity of the children, with numerous cases of abuses perpetrated by the same teachers or caregivers of the shelter. Some stated that within the establishment, there were many pregnant women who, after being forced to give birth, had their children taken away and registered under the Verduzco surname, thereby depriving the mothers of any rights over their babies. Thousands of children were adopted by Rosa Verduzco, despite its illegality, and worse yet, nobody stopped her from committing the crime. On the contrary, it was allowed. What Rosa did next with those children is even more heinous. Having legal custody of the adopted people allowed her to keep them away from their families until they reached adulthood. Whenever their relatives tried to visit them, they were violently expelled from the institution. But later, when they were supposedly able to finally go out into the world as restored individuals, Rosa demanded an exorbitant sum of money in return, as she had authority over them, effectively finding under that excuse a way to traffic people. It was impossible for these families to gather the demanded sum, so some never managed to leave. Moreover, if they tried to escape, they faced brutal beatings and confinement in cells, to the point that one of the victims reported that after a failed escape attempt, their ears were cut off as punishment. What had once been a shelter had ultimately become a prison. Long list of testimonies exposed the tortures and crimes committed within La Gran Familia. At the time, the Attorney General's office witnessed firsthand the deplorable state of the facilities. Children sleeping in broken bunk beds among trash, rats, and bed bugs, completely dirty bathrooms, and terrible infrastructure. The nauseating odor emanating from the place could be felt from the street, with excrement, urine, and decomposing food revealing the reality that was lived there. It was evident that the place was neglected, and the money from donations was not being used for improvements. These findings cast doubt on the benevolence that had positioned Rosa Verduzco as a legend, a saintly figure in Mexico and the world for decades. Thus, finally, on July 15, 2014, the 81-year-old woman and 6 of her assistants were arrested. Meanwhile, more than 600 people living there, including minors and adults, were rescued from the precarious conditions. Despite all the evidence against her, Rosa Verduzco was released without any charges due to her delicate health condition. The burden of pre-existing illnesses, such as diabetes and heart problems, led to physical and cerebral deterioration, requiring her to be hospitalized. While outside the building, a crowd gathered to pray for her speedy recovery. Others protested against the justice system's decision for not acting in accordance with the reported evidence. Finally, 2 years later, at the age of 84, after being hospitalized again for 20 days, Rosa del Carmen Verduzco passed away due to a sudden stroke. As for the other accused, out of the 6, only 2 were charged with the crimes committed. The others were released just like Rosa. In 2016, 2 years after the discovery of the truth, the Attorney General's office declared itself incompetent to follow up on the investigation into the case, deciding to leave it in the hands of the state. To everyone's surprise, the case remained unresolved, without any resolution, and much less any detainees paying the sentence they deserve for the committed crimes, including deprivation of liberty, the abuse suffered by the children, and the trafficking of them, among other horrific acts. The nickname "The Boss" was not given to Rosa randomly. It was her political contacts who called her that due to her decisive character, her authoritarian personality, and her ability to run a business of such magnitude. What never became clear was how a person with such a strong vocation for service from an early age turned into such a sinister figure, forgetting the true reason why she was there. Some theories suggest that she was involved with Mexican cartels and that La Gran Familia was an ideal place for money laundering. Others believe her ties with politicians personally benefited her, and in exchange for those favors, she forced people to vote for her allies. Indeed, there were those who claimed she was an ambitious woman, extremely strict, who enjoyed others suffering and having control. The reality is that today, the population is divided between those who choose to believe in her good intentions, considering her a saint in life, and those who assert she was one of the most evil people in Mexican history. This contradiction has sparked discussions, even among renowned personalities in culture and politics. What cannot be forgotten is that once again the judicial system has been incapable of providing a certain response to a population that for years hoped the truth would be revealed, and that when it finally happened, nothing changed. Cindy James was born on June 12, 1944, the daughter of Otto and Matilda. Her original name was Cynthia Elizabeth Hack, but she later changed it to Cindy James for reasons that will become apparent. Her father, a retired colonel from the Canadian Air Force, and her mother, housewife, raised Cindy and her 5 siblings in a home known for its kindness, generosity, and friendliness. Cindy, characterized by her special nature and desire to help others, pursued a career in nursing. During this period, her father had re-enlisted with the Air Force and relocated the family to France, where she visited them during holidays. During this time, in letters to her family, Cindy occasionally referred to an unnamed intern she had met during her studies. She claimed that the two had at one point been engaged, and that, after finding he had terminal cancer, the man committed suicide while the couple were on a skiing trip. None of her parents or siblings, however, ever met the man, and Cindy did not name him. In the summer of 1965, Cindy met Roy Makepeace, a South African psychiatrist 18 years her senior. The two married on December 9, 1966, the same year she graduated from nursing school, despite the age difference. Their marriage initially seemed harmonious, and they began their life together with Cindy working as a nurse. In 1975, Cindy's career took a significant turn when she became the coordinator of a day center for minors with behavioral issues. Her dedication and passion for her work were evident during her 12-year tenure at the center. Cindy's commitment to the children was deeply appreciated by their parents, who recognized her profound impact and devotion. A pivotal moment in Cindy's life occurred after these 12 years when she decided to seek change. She left her job at the day center and accepted a nursing position at Richmond Hospital. Around the same time, Cindy and Roy's marriage ended in divorce. This marked a complete transformation in Cindy's life. She moved out of the house she shared with Roy, found a new place to live, adopted a pet, and immersed herself in work to stay occupied. This busy new lifestyle was Cindy's way of coping with the changes and challenges following her divorce. It's not clear why she divorced Roy. What has been found is that at least on 2 or 3 occasions, Roy had hit Cindy, so perhaps the reason she divorced was that he mistreated her. Despite this, it is known that Cindy and her ex-husband, Roy, claimed to have divorced on amicable terms, even though he had physically assaulted her several times. They maintained that they still had a good relationship and got along well. However, 4 months after her divorce and the beginning of her new life, Cindy's nightmare commenced. In October 1982, Cindy began receiving numerous unsettling phone calls at her home. Often, these calls were met with silence, as if no one was on the other end, or she would hear faint sounds like breathing or mumbling, but could not discern any clear message. This pattern persisted, suggesting that it was not an error but an intentional act to intimidate her. The calls were made from an untraceable number, leaving Cindy in the dark about the identity of the caller. On one occasion, while at home with friends, Cindy answered the phone only to hear the familiar, indiscernible noises. After hanging up, she noticed that the living room curtains, which she had previously closed, were now open. Startled, she closed the curtains and blinds, but the phone rang again. This time, the caller ominously remarked, "It's silly for you to hide. I know you're in the living room." This incident epitomized the terrifying reality Cindy faced daily, feeling watched yet unable to see her observer. The harassment escalated as Cindy began receiving bizarre letters in her mail. These letters, composed of newspaper clippings arranged to form threatening messages, conveyed ominous sentiments like "soon, Cindy, soon, and you're dead." Additionally, some letters contained violent imagery, depicting assaulted women or a person brandishing a knife near a woman's image. Despite the palpable threat these letters posed, Cindy had no clue about their origin and had never encountered the sender. Fearing for her safety and unsure of what to do, Cindy sought advice from her parents and ex-husband Roy. Both her parents and Roy urged her to contact the police and file a formal complaint, which Cindy did on October 12, 1982. The police, in their investigation, interviewed Cindy's friends and family to ascertain if anyone bore a grudge against her or knew of someone who might wish her harm. However, their efforts yielded no leads. Cindy, known for her compassionate and helpful nature as a nurse devoted to aiding people and children, was widely regarded as a genuinely kind and generous individual. This raised the question, who would want to harm someone like Cindy? The police were unable to identify anyone who wished to harm Cindy James, contrary to expectations that the situation would resolve after her complaint. The harassment persisted. Just 3 days later, while Cindy was in her kitchen, a brick shattered her window. Understandably alarmed, Cindy immediately contacted the police. On their arrival, officers conducted a thorough search of the house, yard, the alley behind the house, and the paths between the neighboring houses. Despite their efforts, they found no evidence of suspicious activity or clues to the perpetrator's identity. No witnesses had seen anyone, leaving the police with no leads. It seemed as though Cindy was being attacked by an unseen force. A week later, as Cindy prepared for bed, she encountered another disturbing scene. In her bedroom, She found her pillow slashed as if someone had attacked it with a knife. Cindy again called the police, who this time dispatched a different officer, Patrick McBride, to investigate. He thoroughly examined the surroundings and spoke with Cindy. After their discussion, he expressed his belief that Roy, Cindy's ex-husband, was responsible for the attacks. Cindy was skeptical, finding it hard to believe, especially since Roy had advised her to contact the police. Nevertheless, Pat was convinced that Roy was the culprit. To enhance Cindy's safety, Pat installed locks on all the doors and set up detectors in her house. He committed to checking on her daily and did so for nearly a month. During this time, Pat and Cindy grew close, eventually starting a romantic relationship. While Pat lived with Cindy, the harassment ceased. However, Pat remained vigilant, continuing to monitor the house's surroundings. One day, he encountered Roy near the back of the house and confronted him. Roy explained that he was concerned for Cindy's safety and was checking to ensure she was not in danger from her stalker. Pat, however, doubted Roy's explanation and maintained his suspicion that Roy was the one harassing Cindy. After a month, Cindy decided to end her cohabitation with Pat, though their relationship did not immediately dissolve. Once Pat left, the tranquility that had settled during his stay vanished, and the unsettling phone calls, letters, and noises resumed, marking the return of Cindy's nightmare. On one occasion, Cindy arrived home to a horrifying scene: 3 dead cats inside her house, accompanied by a chilling note stating, "You're next." In an effort to enhance her security, Cindy installed lights on her porch to potentially spot any intruders. However, she frequently found her porch lights and phone line broken. Despite repeatedly reporting these incidents to the police, their investigations yielded no evidence. There was no sign that anyone besides Cindy had been in or around the house. Not even footprints were found. As a result, the police decided to tap her phone in hopes of tracking the calls, but the brief duration of the calls hindered their ability to trace the caller's location. After some time, Cindy experienced her first physical attack. She had invited her close friend Agnes for a girls' night at her home. When Agnes arrived and noticed the house was dark, she suspected something was amiss. After attempting to reach Cindy without success, Agnes entered the house and found Cindy lying on the floor, unconscious, with her hands tied behind her back and a pair of nylon stockings wrapped tightly around her neck. Agnes quickly removed the stockings, allowing Cindy to regain consciousness. Upon waking, Cindy could not recall the full extent of the attack. She remembered needing something from her garage, which required her to go outside, as there was no direct access from inside the house. It was during this moment that she was attacked from behind and strangled with the stockings. The only detail Cindy could remember about her attacker was that they wore white sneakers, a common and non-distinctive feature. Realizing her life could not continue in this manner, Cindy decided to make a radical change. She altered her appearance, dyed her hair, and chose to move out of her current residence, changing her last name from Hack to James. This decision led her to return to the house she had previously shared with her ex-husband, who offered her the place to live while he moved elsewhere. Although Roy's gesture appeared helpful, the circumstances surrounding it raised suspicions. After relocating to her former home, she continued to discover unsettling items on her porch, such as piles of raw meat accompanied by threatening notes declaring, "You're mixed," and "You are dead meat." These notes, crafted from newspaper clippings, reappeared relentlessly, along with the resumption of mysterious phone calls, now directed to her new number at Roy's house. Cindy persistently contacted the police regarding these incidents, and they responded each time. However, the officers were unable to find any physical evidence or signs of anyone else's presence besides Cindy's. This lack of evidence led the police to grow skeptical about her claims, suspecting that she might be fabricating the events. A grave concern since police protection depends on the credibility of the victim. Cindy had been enduring this harassment for almost 7 years, facing different forms of torment daily. Throughout these 7 years, the police, repeatedly visiting her property and finding no leads, started to feel worn out by the case. Realizing the diminishing attention and belief from the police, Cindy decided to hire a private detective. The detective installed special motion-activated lights on her porch, designed to illuminate the area whenever someone approached. These lights were strategically placed to avoid tampering, as previous outdoor lights had been repeatedly broken. He also provided Cindy with a walkie-talkie equipped with a panic button, enabling her to alert him, the authorities, and paramedics in case of an emergency. This device also allowed him to listen in on Cindy's surroundings, offering a way to monitor her safety. 2 days after receiving the walkie-talkie, Cindy informed the detective of her intention to walk her dog, leaving the device at home. Upon her return, the detective heard through the walkie-talkie that she had entered the house. However, shortly afterward, he detected unusual noises, suggesting someone else was present with Cindy. Faced with the dilemma of potentially alerting the intruder by speaking, he chose to drive to Cindy's house in an attempt to catch the individual in the act. On his arrival at Cindy James' house, he found a dire situation. Opening the door, he discovered Cindy lying unconscious on the floor with a dagger embedded in her hand. Between her hand and the dagger was a note, and around her neck were black nylon stockings as if someone had attempted to strangle her. He immediately assisted Cindy, called for paramedics, and she was swiftly taken to the hospital. Still alive, the note reading "You're dead meat" was particularly noteworthy as it was handwritten, suggesting the possibility of obtaining fingerprints or analyzing the handwriting for clues. At the hospital, doctors noticed a sur-inch mark on Cindy's arm, indicating she had been injected with a sedative. When Cindy regained consciousness, she was questioned about any recollections of her attacker or the incident. Unfortunately, her memory was blank. She could only recall entering her house after walking her dog and being attacked from behind. Following the injection, her memory ceased and she lost consciousness. Frustratingly, the police did not pursue any potential leads from the incident. They neglected to analyze the note for DNA or fingerprints, nor did they examine the dagger for any forensic evidence. Despite the presence of potential clues, the police remained convinced that Cindy was self-inflicting these wounds and orchestrating the entire scenario for attention. The private detective disagreed with the police's assessment and believed Cindy was not responsible for her own plight. Considering Cindy's history of being harassed for 7 years, he found it implausible that she would inflict such harm on herself, particularly in such a violent manner as her last attack. Resolute in finding the truth, he decided to explore the possibility of hypnosis, a common investigative technique in the 70s and 80s, to uncover any repressed memories Cindy might have of her assailant. However, the hypnosis session was unsuccessful, leaving Cindy's memory of the attack as elusive as ever. The possibility that Cindy's ex-partner, a psychiatrist, might have played a role in her amnesia was considered. Given his professional background, he could have had the knowledge and means to manipulate Cindy's memory using drugs or hypnotherapy. This theory, while speculative, raised questions about the extent of his involvement in her ordeal and the possibility of his using his expertise to conceal his actions. Despite the hypnosis session failing to unlock any memories for Cindy James, the police proceeded to administer a polygraph test. At the time, the polygraph was a widely used investigative tool, despite its reliability being questionable today. It is understood that a person who firmly believes in their version of events can pass a polygraph test. Cindy underwent the test and passed, indicating she was not lying according to the polygraph results. However, the police interpreted this outcome as Cindy being too traumatized to provide reliable results. This interpretation was in stark contrast to their earlier stance, where they believed Cindy was fabricating the events for attention, highlighting a contradiction in their approach and a reluctance to further investigate the case. Despite the police's skepticism, they decided to re-interview Roy, Cindy's ex-husband, and a prime suspect due to his background as a psychiatrist and access to medications and knowledge that could be used to harm Cindy. However, Roy denied any involvement. He too passed a polygraph test, which further complicated the investigation. The police's interest in the case persisted, driven by the curiosity surrounding the unexplained events occurring around Cindy. To monitor the situation, the police discreetly stationed a patrol car near Cindy's house for a week. During this period, no unusual incidents were reported. It was on December 11, 1985, that Cindy was found in a critical state. She was unconscious, with a black nylon stocking tied around her neck and a puncture mark on her arm from an injection. Cindy was physically battered and bore cuts on her body, but was alive. Taken to the hospital, she again had no memory of the attack upon regaining consciousness. After being discharged, Cindy, understandably frightened, invited her friend Agnes and Agnes' husband to stay at her house. That night, they reported hearing strange noises in the basement. Upon investigation, they discovered a fire in the basement. Agnes' husband noticed a person outside the house, not on the property but nearby, and looking towards the house. The identity of this person remained unknown due to the darkness and the distance. When they attempted to call for help, they discovered the phone line was cut, prompting Agnes' husband to seek assistance from neighbors. The firefighters were called and successfully extinguished the fire. After the fire incident in Cindy James' basement, the police conducted a thorough examination of her house, but found no evidence, such as footprints or any other signs of an intruder. Consequently, they concluded that Cindy was the one who started the fire. Due to their belief that Cindy was self-inflicting harm and the potential danger it posed, the police recommended she be admitted to a psychiatric institution. Feeling overwhelmed and uncertain about her situation, Cindy agreed to the hospitalization and spent the next 10 weeks in a psychiatric facility. On her release from the hospital, Cindy realized the importance of sharing her experiences and suspicions to shed light on the ongoing nightmare. She gathered her friends, family, and the police to disclose information she had previously withheld. Cindy revealed that during one of the attacks, the assailant had threatened to harm her family if she ever disclosed her beliefs about the identity of her attacker. She expressed a firm conviction that her ex-husband was the stalker. The police, prompted by Cindy's revelation, interrogated Roy once more. Despite Cindy's accusations, Roy maintained his innocence, asserting that he had always supported her, even advising her to contact the police and offering her a place to stay. To bolster his claim, Roy presented a recording he claimed to have captured on the answering machine at the house where Cindy was living, which was previously their shared home. The recording featured a female voice, suggesting that a woman, not Roy, was harassing Cindy. The police's response to Roy's evidence and Cindy's accusations was disheartening. They seemed more inclined to believe that Cindy was fabricating the entire situation rather than pursuing leads that could reveal the true perpetrator. This approach led to a troubling scenario where the police favored Roy's narrative over Cindy's and hastily dismissed her claims. Roy further complicated matters by suggesting to the police that Cindy suffered from multiple personality disorder. This claim appeared baseless, as no such diagnosis was made during Cindy's extended stay in the psychiatric hospital. Roy's insistence on this theory coupled with his actions and concerns for Cindy that seemed inconsistent with his claims, cast doubt on his credibility. The overall situation presented a perplexing and unresolved puzzle, with the police fixated on discrediting Cindy rather than thoroughly investigating the case. On May 25, 1989, Cindy James started her day early, around 7 a.m., by going to the bank to deposit a check. She also visited a store to purchase groceries and had plans to meet with her best friend Agnes and Agnes' husband. Despite the police's suspicion that Cindy was fabricating the events surrounding her, their investigation continued. It's notable that over the 7 years of Cindy's case, the police spent an estimated $1.5 million, indicating the significant resources dedicated to the investigation. However, there was a sense of wariness from the police, as if they were conducting the investigation out of obligation rather than genuine concern. On the day in question, when Agnes and her husband arrived at Cindy's house, they found it odd that she wasn't there. While an empty house might not usually cause concern, Cindy's situation was different due to the ongoing harassment she faced. Agnes decided to alert the police while they searched for Cindy at places she might have visited, like the bank and the store. Their search led them to Cindy's car in the bank's parking lot. The presence of the car in the afternoon, after the bank's closing hours, raised alarm, especially considering her plans with her friends. Approaching the car, they found Cindy was not inside, deepening their concern. They went to the police station to report the situation. Despite initially being told they must wait 24 hours to file a missing person report, they convinced an officer to investigate due to the unique circumstances of Cindy's case. The officer, inspecting the car at night, discovered bloodstains on the driver's seat and found Cindy's purse, bank card, and a deposit receipt inside the car. The receipt showed Cindy had been at the bank early that morning. In the trunk were her grocery bags and a gift she had purchased for her friends at approximately 2:25 p.m. With this information, the police proceeded to Roy's apartment to question him. Arriving close to dawn, they found Roy at home. He explained that he had spent the afternoon and evening with a friend, having dinner and then staying at the friend's house until about 11:30 p.m. Roy's alibi appeared solid and could be corroborated, leading the police to continue their search for Cindy elsewhere. The disappearance of Cindy James mobilized the entire city of Richmond in a massive search operation. Helicopters, dogs, vehicles, and numerous people were deployed in an extensive effort to locate her. The search extended to various terrains, including underwater areas and the port, encompassing the wide radius around the location where her car was found. Despite the exhaustive efforts and resources utilized, Cindy remained missing. On June 8th of the same year, more than 2 weeks after her disappearance, Cindy was found in the yard of an abandoned house, approximately an hour and a half's distance from where her car had been located. The discovery was made in a region relatively close to the initial search area, which was surprising given the scale and intensity of the search efforts. The abandoned house, situated in an area frequented by many people, led investigators to theorize that Cindy could not have been left there for the entire duration of her disappearance. The likelihood of her being seen by passersby in such a busy area suggested that she may have been held captive elsewhere before being left at the location. Cindy's body exhibited signs of severe physical abuse, including bruises, cuts, and a syringe injection mark on her arm. She was found with her hands and feet bound, and a black nylon stocking was tied around her neck, consistent with previous incidents. The autopsy revealed that Cindy had been injected with a substantial amount of morphine and another sedative medication, leading to the conclusion that she had been drugged and then strangled. The police's conclusion about the case was controversial and unexpected. They posited that Cindy had committed suicide by injecting herself with a lethal dose of morphine and another sedative. then walking a significant distance barefoot to the location where she was found. Remarkably, her feet were clean and her shoes were not found nearby. The police theorized that Cindy managed to tie her own hands and feet and strangle herself with a nylon stocking. This conclusion was met with skepticism and disbelief due to the implausibility of the scenario and the lack of concrete evidence to support such a theory. Several alternative theories have been proposed to explain Cindy's tragic fate. One theory suggests that her ex-husband was responsible for the harassment and attacks. This theory posits that Roy's apparent compassion and offers of help were tactics to divert suspicion from himself. Another theory implicates Pat, the police officer who developed a close relationship with Cindy. It suggests that Pat may have been her stalker, using his position to gain her trust, and then resuming the harassment after their relationship ended. However, this theory is complicated by the lack of concrete evidence linking him to the crimes. A less credible theory is that Cindy was responsible for the attacks herself, due to a mental disorder. This theory is largely dismissed due to the nature of her injuries and the circumstances of her death, which seem beyond the realm of self-infliction. Lastly, there is the possibility that an unknown stalker, unrelated to Cindy's close acquaintances, was responsible for the harassment and attacks. This theory considers the potential involvement of an outsider who targeted not only Cindy but potentially others as well. Each theory presents its own set of questions and uncertainties, leaving the true nature of Cindy Jane's tragic experiences unresolved.